Dishonesty. Dishonesty is one of the most damaging red flags in human behavior, yet it often goes unnoticed until the damage is done. At its core, dishonesty erodes trust, the very foundation upon which any meaningful relationship is built. It can be subtle at first, a white lie here, an omission there, but over time it accumulates, and the cracks in trust widen. The person who lies is not just deceiving others, but also hiding parts of themselves, creating a barrier that can never be fully breached. When someone is dishonest, they manipulate reality to fit their needs. What seems like a harmless fib may grow into a pattern as the person becomes more adept at weaving falsehoods to avoid discomfort or consequences. This may start with small things, saying they're fine when they're not, or claiming to have done something they haven't. But the emotional cost to the person being deceived is immeasurable. Doubt starts creeping in, poisoning even the most solid moments of connection. Lies, no matter how trivial, leave scars on the heart. The victim starts questioning everything, wondering what's real and what's a carefully crafted illusion. The emotional manipulation can be so subtle that it takes a long time to recognize the toll it's taking. Over time, trust fades, and the victim is left with the painful realization that nothing in the relationship was as it seemed. Dishonesty creates distance, emotional, physical, and psychological. It poisons every interaction, leaving a residue of mistrust that can take years to unravel. Manipulation. Manipulation is a cunning red flag that can quietly undermine every aspect of a relationship, often leaving its victims feeling confused, controlled, and powerless. At its heart, manipulation is the art of twisting someone's emotions or thoughts to achieve a hidden agenda, often without the victim even realizing they are being played. The manipulator operates in the shadows, using subtle tactics to influence decisions, emotions, and actions in their favor. They might start with harmless requests, but soon these requests evolve into demands, requests that make you feel guilty if not granted, or selfish if you dare say no. What makes manipulation so insidious is its quiet nature. The manipulator does not scream or demand openly. Instead, they are patient, weaving webs of guilt, fear, and insecurity. They make you believe that their needs are more important than your own, and that fulfilling them is your duty. They twist your words, make you question your reality, and keep you off balance emotionally. Each time you bend to their will, they gain more control, eroding your sense of self-worth and autonomy. In the beginning, it may feel like kindness or concern, but soon you'll notice the emotional toll, the guilt, the doubt, the exhaustion. You'll start doubting your own instincts, wondering if it's you who's being unreasonable. Manipulators thrive on this uncertainty, knowing that once they plant seeds of self-doubt, they can control you with ease. What's left is a person who feels lost, trapped, and unsure, but who has been convinced they're the one at fault for everything falling apart. Manipulation hides behind a mask of charm, making its effects even harder to recognize until it's too late. Attention-seeking. Attention-seeking behavior is a red flag that can slowly but surely drain the emotional energy from those around the person exhibiting it. At its core, this behavior stems from a deep need for validation, but it often manifests in ways that demand constant focus, praise, and reassurance from others. The person may not even be fully aware of how they manipulate the situation, but the need to be the center of attention becomes their driving force. They crave acknowledgement, even at the expense of the relationships they supposedly cherish. In social settings, attention-seeking individuals tend to dominate conversations, constantly steering everything back to themselves. They might exaggerate stories, overstate their achievements, or create drama just to ensure all eyes are on them. When they don't get the attention they crave, they can become visibly upset, irritable, or act out in exaggerated ways. Their self-worth seems to be tied directly to how much attention they can command, and if they don't receive it, they may go to great lengths to provoke reactions, sometimes in unhealthy or destructive ways. The emotional toll on those around them is significant, constantly having to validate someone's existence, constantly being pulled into their emotional roller coaster wears people down. What starts as a desire for companionship and connection quickly turns into a manipulative cycle where love and care are demanded but rarely reciprocated. The attention seeker thrives on external validation, but it's a hollow craving that can never be truly satisfied, leaving both them and their relationships in a constant state of emotional depletion. Unreliability. Unreliability is one of the most disheartening and frustrating red flags in human behavior. It's a trait that wears down trust, creates uncertainty, and leaves others feeling abandoned or dismissed. At its core, unreliability is a pattern of inconsistency, where promises are made but never kept, and commitments are frequently broken without regard for the consequences. People who are unreliable don't seem to take their words seriously, and their actions reflect a disregard for the time, effort, and emotions of others. In relationships, whether personal or professional, reliability is the foundation that holds everything together. When someone fails to follow through consistently, it creates an environment of unpredictability and disappointment. At first, the little slip-ups may seem harmless, a missed text, a delayed promise, but over time, these actions compound. What begins as an occasional failure to keep a plan turns into a chronic pattern of neglect, making it difficult to trust that anything they say will actually happen. The emotional cost of unreliability is profound. It breeds feelings of frustration, doubt, and insecurity. You start to question your own judgment, wondering why you continue to invest in someone who can't be counted on. Relationships built on unreliable people are like houses made of sand. Each promise is another grain that slips through your fingers, leaving you with the bitter realization that your trust has been taken for granted. The toll of unreliability is not just on the broken promises, but on the emotional energy drained by constantly having to adapt to their inconsistency, unsure of when they will let you down again. Gaslighting. Gaslighting is one of the most insidious and damaging forms of manipulation, and it can shatter a person's sense of reality in ways that are deeply unsettling. At its core, gaslighting is the act of twisting someone's perception of the truth, making them question their own memory, feelings, and sanity. The gaslighter systematically denies facts, distorts information, and creates confusion, all while maintaining a facade of innocence. This tactic is a slow burn. What starts as small, subtle lies escalates over time until the victim is completely disoriented, unsure of what's real, and desperately seeking validation. A gaslighter may dismiss your concerns, telling you that you're too sensitive or imagining things. They may deny things they've said or done, even when you remember them clearly. In the most extreme cases, they may even invent events or alter past situations to paint themselves as the victim, leaving you feeling like you're going crazy. Over time, the constant manipulation takes a toll. You begin doubting yourself, second-guessing your emotions, and feeling trapped in a maze of deceit. What makes gaslighting particularly damaging is that it's not just about lying. It's about eroding a person's very sense of self. It makes you feel disconnected from your own reality, and that uncertainty is what the gaslighter preys upon. They thrive on your confusion and vulnerability, using it as a means of control. The emotional damage caused by gaslighting can leave scars far deeper than any lie, because when you can't trust yourself, you're left completely at the mercy of the manipulator's narrative. Blame shifting. Blame shifting is a toxic behavior that undermines accountability and creates an environment where nothing ever gets resolved. At its core, blame shifting is the refusal to take responsibility for one's actions or mistakes, instead projecting the fault onto others. This behavior can start with small excuses or denials, but over time, it becomes a recurring pattern. The person who engages in blame shifting never seems to own up to their shortcomings or errors. Instead, they manipulate the situation to make you feel responsible for their failures, missteps, or emotional reactions. In relationships, blame shifting creates an atmosphere of confusion and frustration. It's a constant cycle where no matter what you do, the problem is always someone else's fault. When things go wrong, they'll accuse you of causing it, even if they were the ones who acted irresponsibly. This shifts the focus away from finding a solution and onto defending yourself. The emotional weight it places on you is enormous. Over time, you may begin to question your actions, thinking maybe you really did cause the problem. But in truth, the manipulator is simply playing a game of deflection, using blame to control the narrative and avoid any real responsibility. The psychological toll is profound. Constantly having to defend yourself, second-guessing your own role in things, erodes your confidence. Blame shifting prevents growth, keeps issues unresolved, and traps you in a state of perpetual frustration. It's a behavior that poisons communication, fostering mistrust and resentment. What started as a small avoidance tactic becomes a relationship-killing habit that keeps you trapped in a cycle of blame with no way out. Avoidance of accountability. Avoidance of accountability is one of the most corrosive red flags in human behavior, one that erodes trust and creates toxic dynamics in any relationship. At its core, this behavior involves shirking responsibility for one's actions, decisions, and mistakes, often by deflecting blame or making excuses. Instead of owning up to their actions, a person who avoids accountability will go to great lengths to dodge the consequences, often pointing the finger at others or external circumstances. This can leave those around them feeling helpless, frustrated, and unheard. The emotional impact of avoiding accountability is immense. When someone can't or won't take responsibility for their mistakes, it makes others question their worth and integrity. It leaves people feeling as though their emotions and experiences don't matter. You start to feel like you're stuck in a never-ending cycle of excuses, unable to confront the core issues at hand, whether it's a friend, partner, or colleague. The inability to own up to one's actions often leads to broken trust, resentment, and, ultimately, a sense of being emotionally abandoned. In the face of accountability avoidance, frustration builds and relationships begin to crack under the strain. It feels as though no matter how many times you confront them, the cycle continues because the person has learned to evade responsibility rather than facing it head on. The result is a relationship where one person is left carrying the emotional weight while the other remains unaccountable, untouchable, and, ultimately, emotionally distant. The lack of accountability undermines any sense of fairness or equality, leaving a toxic void that slowly consumes everything. Lack of empathy. A lack of empathy is one of the most emotionally jarring red flags to encounter in any relationship. At its core, empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another person, to step into their shoes and experience their emotions. When this fundamental trait is missing, it creates a chasm of disconnection that is difficult to bridge. A person who lacks empathy may appear cold, indifferent, or even dismissive of the suffering or joy of others, leaving those around them feeling unseen, unheard, and emotionally isolated. When you're dealing with someone who lacks empathy, conversations often feel one-sided. They may show little to no concern for your feelings or the feelings of others. If you express joy, frustration, sadness, or pain, they might respond with indifference or, worse, mockery. The emotional impact of this behavior is deeply hurtful. You start to feel invisible, like your emotions don't matter. The person you're trying to connect with simply doesn't seem to care enough to understand you, leaving you emotionally vulnerable and unsupported. In more intimate relationships, a lack of empathy can feel suffocating. Instead of a partner who listens and validates your experiences, you're left with someone who is emotionally unavailable, who may even gaslight you when you try to express your emotions. The more you give, the more they take, without ever giving back the emotional care you desperately need. Over time, this can erode your sense of self-worth and leave you questioning whether your emotions even have value. The sting of being with someone who cannot or will not empathize is profound. It breeds loneliness and, ultimately, emotional abandonment. Control. Control is one of the most toxic and suffocating red flags in human behavior, a silent force that gradually tightens its grip until it dominates every aspect of a person's life. At its core, control is about power, the need to dictate, influence, and manipulate others to align with one's own desires, regardless of the other person's autonomy or well-being. The person who seeks control often disguises it as care or concern, but beneath that veneer lies a deep-seated need to dominate, monitor, and restrict. They make decisions for you, question your every move, and limit your choices to ensure you never step outside the boundaries they've set. Control manifests in many ways, through constant questioning, subtle criticisms, or even direct commands. The controlling individual might limit your social interactions, decide where you go, who you speak to, and what you can do in your free time. At first, it may seem harmless, a protective gesture or a well-intended suggestion, but soon it escalates into a pattern of micromanagement that leaves you feeling suffocated, isolated, and powerless. You may start to second-guess your own decisions, constantly seeking approval before you take any action. The emotional toll of being controlled is immense. It strips away your sense of independence, erodes your confidence, and creates an environment where you feel as though your every move is being scrutinized. In relationships, control is the opposite of freedom. It creates a toxic cycle where one person's desires are placed above the other's needs. It doesn't just break down trust, it stifles growth, leaving you in a constant state of emotional and mental constraint, unsure of where you end and the controller begins. Passive aggression. Passive aggression is a silent but highly destructive red flag, often hidden behind a mask of politeness or apparent indifference. At its core, passive aggression is the expression of negative feelings indirectly, through actions rather than words. Instead of confronting an issue head-on, the passive-aggressive individual uses subtle tactics to express anger, frustration, or resentment, like giving the silent treatment, making snide remarks, or sabotaging others behind their backs. This behavior is incredibly frustrating because it leaves the victim unsure of where they stand, constantly navigating a maze of mixed signals. The passive-aggressive person rarely communicates their true feelings directly. Instead, they might agree to something, only to later procrastinate, underperform, or act with deliberate negligence. They avoid confrontation, preferring to silently stew and let their anger simmer until it eventually leaks out in small, subtle ways. This can range from pretending everything is fine while secretly harboring resentment to giving backhanded compliments that sting with hidden bitterness. The emotional toll of dealing with passive aggression is profound. It creates an environment of confusion and tension, where communication is clouded and trust becomes strained. You are left constantly guessing whether someone's actions are intentional or just a result of poor communication. Over time, this behavior can break down relationships, leaving the victim feeling powerless, invalidated, and perpetually on edge. The worst part is that because the aggression is so indirect, the passive-aggressive person can deny their role in the conflict, making you feel crazy for even bringing it up. It's a silent manipulation that wreaks havoc on emotional well-being. Victim mentality. Victim mentality is a powerful red flag that can subtly yet profoundly disrupt relationships and personal growth. At its core, this mindset involves seeing oneself as perpetually wronged or oppressed, regardless of the circumstances. Those with a victim mentality constantly frame their lives through the lens of being a helpless bystander to their own story. No matter the situation, they believe the world or the people around them are out to get them, and they never fully take ownership of their role in their problems. What makes the victim mentality so emotionally draining is its insistence on helplessness. It's as if the person refuses to acknowledge their agency or responsibility in shaping their own life. Instead of seeing challenges as opportunities for growth or learning, they view every setback as further evidence of their suffering. This creates a cycle of self-pity and blame, making them resistant to change or self-improvement. People around them may begin to feel like they're walking on eggshells, constantly trying to pacify or rescue someone who refuses to take action to help themselves. The emotional cost of being in the orbit of someone with a victim mentality is profound. It drains your energy and creates a toxic dynamic where you're expected to constantly offer sympathy and support, even when they refuse to help themselves. Over time, this dynamic leads to frustration, resentment, and emotional exhaustion. Instead of growth or collaboration, the relationship becomes about managing their endless complaints and inability to take responsibility for their own life. The longer this pattern persists, the more both parties become stuck in a loop of dissatisfaction and disempowerment. Boundary violations. Boundary violations are one of the most invasive and damaging red flags in any relationship. Boundaries are the invisible lines we set to protect our emotional, physical, and psychological well-being. When someone continually disregards these boundaries, whether they're personal, emotional, or even physical, it can feel like an assault on your very sense of self. The person who violates boundaries often doesn't respect your right to say no and may push you to accept behaviors, words, or actions that make you uncomfortable, all while disregarding your autonomy. At first, it might start small. Perhaps they talk over you in conversations, take your things without asking, or question your personal space. But over time, these violations grow more blatant and aggressive. They might invade your privacy, demand constant attention, or make you feel guilty for wanting time alone. With each infringement, your boundaries are slowly chipped away, and what was once a safe, comfortable space for you becomes a battleground for control and discomfort. The emotional toll of boundary violations is profound. It creates a sense of helplessness and vulnerability as you begin to feel as though your needs and desires are secondary to the other person's wants. It erodes trust and fosters resentment, making you question whether you have the right to assert yourself at all. Over time, you may begin to lose sight of your own identity, as the constant push and pull on your boundaries leave you emotionally drained and unsure of where you end and the other person begins. Jealousy. Jealousy is a powerful and destructive red flag that can slowly consume relationships, leaving behind distrust and emotional turmoil. At its core, jealousy is rooted in insecurity, fear of loss, and a need for control. The jealous person feels threatened by any potential competition or perceived shift in attention, often reacting with suspicion, possessiveness, and resentment. It begins with subtle signs, excessive questioning about where you've been, who you've been with, or what you're doing, but it escalates quickly, consuming both parties in a toxic cycle of doubt and insecurity. When jealousy takes hold, it clouds rational thought. The jealous individual may accuse you of things you haven't done, or they may create scenarios in their mind that haven't even happened. They may monitor your every move, expecting constant reassurances and validation to quench their fears. The emotional weight of jealousy can be stifling, as it pushes you into a corner where your actions are scrutinized and your independence threatened. The jealous person thrives on controlling your interactions, often isolating you from friends, family, or anyone they view as a potential threat. The toll of living with jealousy is exhausting. It breeds resentment, creates unnecessary tension, and erodes the trust that is vital for a healthy relationship. Instead of fostering love, connection, and mutual respect, jealousy undermines these foundational elements, turning what should be a partnership into a constant struggle for dominance and validation. It creates a sense of emotional imprisonment where the jealousy holds the power and you're left defending yourself against unfounded accusations. Perfectionism. Perfectionism is a dangerous red flag that can slowly consume a person and everyone around them with the crushing weight of unattainable standards. At its core, perfectionism is the belief that anything less than flawless is unacceptable, leading to relentless self-criticism and an overwhelming need for control. The perfectionist is never satisfied with their own efforts, no matter how great, and constantly strives for an ideal that can never be reached. This inner drive to achieve perfection often spills over into their relationships, work, and personal life, creating a toxic environment of unspoken pressure and fear of failure. In relationships, a perfectionist's need for control and ideal outcomes can be stifling. They expect not only perfection from themselves, but also from others, leaving no room for mistakes or imperfections. Their expectations can feel suffocating as they demand precision, flawless execution, and unwavering performance in everything from small tasks to major life decisions. The emotional toll on those around them is immense. Those who fail to meet these high standards are often met with disappointment, criticism, or withdrawal, creating feelings of inadequacy and self-doubt. The perfectionist's internal battle is just as damaging. They are often paralyzed by fear of making mistakes, fear of being judged, and fear of never measuring up. This constant pressure breeds anxiety and prevents them from enjoying the process or celebrating accomplishments. Instead, their worth is tied to unattainable ideals, leaving them constantly unsatisfied and emotionally drained. Perfectionism creates a cycle of never-ending striving, where no matter how hard they work, they are always chasing something they will never truly grasp. Inconsistency. Inconsistency is a deeply unsettling red flag that creates instability and uncertainty in any relationship. At its core, it is the unpredictable behavior of someone who fails to act in a reliable, steady manner. They may be warm and caring one moment, distant or cold the next. Promises may be made only to be broken without warning, leaving you wondering which version of them you'll encounter today. The emotional toll of inconsistency is exhausting, as it forces those around them to constantly adapt, trying to figure out how to interact with someone who seems to change at the drop of a hat. The problem with inconsistency is that it destroys trust. When you cannot rely on someone's words or actions, doubt creeps in. It becomes impossible to know where you stand, and your emotional safety feels threatened. You may begin second-guessing yourself, wondering if something you did caused the shift in their behavior. This cycle of highs and lows can make you feel like you're on an emotional roller coaster, never sure of whether things will be good, bad, or indifferent. In relationships, this kind of instability breeds frustration and insecurity. How can you build a future with someone who cannot even give you the consistency of their presence, support, or affection? The uncertainty makes it hard to plan, to feel safe, or to know if your feelings are truly reciprocated. The emotional drain of constantly adjusting to someone's ever-changing mood or behavior leads to burnout, leaving you emotionally depleted and wondering if the relationship is worth the turmoil. Ghosting. Ghosting is one of the most painful and emotionally disorienting red flags in modern relationships. It occurs when someone abruptly cuts off all communication without any explanation or warning, leaving the other person in a state of confusion and emotional limbo. This behavior often happens after moments of closeness or vulnerability, where the person may have seemed engaged and invested only to disappear without a trace. the sudden silence can feel like a betrayal, especially when it's someone you trusted or thought was forming a meaningful connection with you. When ghosting occurs, it leaves the person on the receiving end questioning everything. Was it something they said or did? Were they not enough? Why did the other person stop responding? The emotional roller coaster is intense. The person who is ghosted feels abandoned, rejected, and often not worthy of closure or respect. They are left to fill in the blanks, trying to make sense of the absence in a sea of unanswered questions. The feeling of being erased can be haunting, as it's not just the loss of the person, but the loss of the connection itself. What makes ghosting so hurtful is that it lacks any empathy or consideration for the other person's feelings. It's an act of emotional cowardice that leaves scars of self-doubt and insecurity. For the one being ghosted, the experience lingers long after the person has disappeared, as they are left with the painful reality that someone who once seemed so present and engaged simply vanished without explanation. Instigation. Instigation is a manipulative red flag that thrives on creating chaos, conflict, and unnecessary drama. At its core, instigation is the act of deliberately provoking others, whether through words, actions, or subtle hints, to incite tension, arguments, or emotional reactions. The instigator's goal is rarely resolution or understanding. Instead, they seek to stir the pot, feed off the ensuing chaos, and watch as others are pulled into their web of conflict. They often thrive on the attention and power that comes from being the source of discord, feeding off the discomfort and heightened emotions of those around them. In relationships, instigators may make passive-aggressive comments, spread rumors, or set people against each other for their own entertainment or gain. They might push buttons, intentionally causing you to react, only to sit back and watch as emotions escalate. What starts as a casual comment or question quickly spirals into a full-blown argument, leaving everyone involved confused, upset, and emotionally drained. The instigator plays the role of the innocent bystander, feigning ignorance while secretly enjoying the chaos they've created. The emotional toll of instigation is heavy. It leaves you questioning your own reactions, wondering if the conflict was justified or if you were manipulated into it. Trust is eroded as you begin to question whether your emotions are being weaponized against you. Instead of fostering understanding or connection, instigation creates a toxic cycle of tension and division, ensuring that peace is never truly achieved. The instigator doesn't want harmony, they want control, and they use conflict as a tool to maintain it. Isolation. Isolation is a silent, insidious red flag that can slowly tear apart connections and leave individuals feeling abandoned, unloved, and emotionally vulnerable. At its core, isolation is the act of intentionally distancing oneself from others, whether through physical withdrawal or emotional detachment. This behavior can start subtly. Someone pulls away from social activities, stops answering texts, or becomes increasingly distant in conversations. But over time, it deepens, leaving the person completely cut off from meaningful relationships and support systems. In relationships, isolation can be a gradual process that often goes unnoticed until it's too late. The individual may start by pulling back from friends, family, or even a partner, excusing it as needing alone time or being too busy. However, the distance slowly grows, and eventually they may start isolating their partner from their own support network, subtly encouraging them to stop seeing friends or family. The intention behind this behavior is control, whether conscious or unconscious. By severing ties with others, the isolated person gains more influence over their partner's emotional state, creating an environment of dependency. The emotional impact of isolation is profound and long-lasting. Those left in isolation often experience a deep sense of loneliness and self-doubt, questioning their worth and whether the relationship is truly healthy. They may feel invisible, as if their emotions and needs don't matter. For the person withdrawing, isolation is often driven by fear or unresolved emotions, but it can result in a devastating cycle of loneliness, depression, and emotional numbness. The longer isolation is allowed to fester, the harder it becomes to break free from, and the more damaging it becomes to both the individual and their relationships. Disrespect. Disrespect is one of the most painful and damaging red flags in human behavior, as it undermines a person's sense of self-worth and dignity. At its core, disrespect involves treating others in a way that diminishes their value, often through hurtful words, actions, or attitudes. It can range from overt insults or demeaning comments to subtle behaviors that dismiss or invalidate someone's feelings, opinions, or boundaries. The emotional impact of disrespect is profound, as it often creates a lasting wound that can be hard to heal. When someone disrespects you, it communicates that you are not valued, that your thoughts and feelings don't matter. Whether it's belittling you in front of others, ignoring your boundaries, or constantly interrupting you, each act of disrespect chips away at your confidence and trust. Over time, it breeds a toxic environment where communication is strained and the emotional safety of the relationship is jeopardized. The person on the receiving end may start to feel invisible, unimportant, or unworthy of care and respect. Disrespect can also breed resentment. As it piles up, the victim begins to internalize the message that they are undeserving of respect, and this can distort their own sense of self. The emotional cost of living in an environment where disrespect is common is immense. It creates constant anxiety, self-doubt, and frustration. Instead of a nurturing and supportive dynamic, the relationship turns into a battleground where feelings are trampled and healing seems impossible. The longer disrespect is allowed to persist, the harder it becomes to salvage any sense of mutual care or trust. Blame game. The blame game is one of the most toxic and emotionally draining red flags in human behavior. At its core, it's the act of deflecting responsibility and pointing fingers at others when things go wrong. Instead of owning up to their mistakes or shortcomings, the person playing the blame game redirects all the fault onto others, refusing to take accountability for their actions. This behavior is a subtle form of manipulation designed to protect the person from consequences while leaving others feeling guilty, confused, or even responsible for problems they didn't create. In relationships, the blame game erodes trust and communication. Every conflict becomes a battleground where the focus shifts from resolution to winning, with the person at fault refusing to acknowledge their role. No matter how many times you try to explain, apologize, or find common ground, they shift the narrative to make you the villain. This relentless cycle of accusation wears down your emotional resilience, as you're left feeling like you're always the one in the wrong, no matter how valid your perspective may be. The emotional toll of the blame game is immense. It creates an atmosphere of guilt and shame, where you begin to second-guess your actions and motives. Instead of growing together and working through problems, you're left carrying the burden of someone else's inability to take responsibility. The longer this dynamic continues, the more damaging it becomes, leaving you emotionally depleted and disillusioned, questioning whether the person you care about can ever truly see you for who you are, or whether they will always play the blame game to avoid their own flaws. Drama-seeking. Drama-seeking behavior is one of the most exhausting and emotionally draining red flags in human interactions. At its core, drama-seeking is the need to create or escalate conflict and chaos, often over trivial matters, for the sake of excitement, attention, or emotional release. The person who thrives on drama often seeks out situations where they can stir up tension, provoke arguments, or magnify small issues into full-blown crises. They are drawn to the chaos like a moth to a flame, feeding off the emotional energy it generates, regardless of the damage it causes to those around them. A drama seeker might exaggerate their own problems, turning minor setbacks into stories of tragedy or desperation just to pull others into their emotional whirlwind. They thrive on having all eyes on them, even if that attention comes at the cost of peace or harmony. It can manifest as constant complaining, needling others to argue, or creating conflicts where none exists. Their need for drama often leaves those around them feeling trapped in a never-ending cycle of emotional upheaval, where peace is fleeting and stability feels impossible. Living with someone who seeks out drama is mentally and emotionally draining. It forces you to become entangled in their mess, whether you want to or not, and leaves you emotionally spent. Instead of focusing on growth, connection, and understanding, every interaction feels like a roller coaster ride, with highs of excitement followed by emotional crashes. The drama seeker doesn't just invite conflict, they create it, ensuring that peace remains out of reach, leaving everyone involved feeling like they're constantly on edge.
Defensiveness.
Defensiveness is a destructive red flag that turns conversations and relationships into battlegrounds, where the focus shifts from understanding to protecting the ego. At its core, defensiveness is a response to perceived criticism or attack, where the individual immediately erects barriers to shield themselves from any discomfort or vulnerability. Rather than engaging in honest dialogue, they deflect, deny, or distort the situation, turning the conversation into a war of words instead of an opportunity for growth or resolution. This knee-jerk reaction not only stifles communication, but also erodes the possibility of meaningful connection. In relationships, defensiveness manifests in many forms. The person may interrupt, dismiss, or minimize the concerns of others, often shifting the blame back onto the person raising the issue. They might become overly emotional or lash out with accusations, making it impossible to address the original concern without escalating the conflict. This behavior reflects a deep insecurity, an inability to accept vulnerability or acknowledge flaws without feeling threatened. Each attempt at resolution is met with resistance, as the focus is always on defending themselves rather than finding a solution. The emotional toll of defensiveness is immense. Those on the receiving end often feel unheard, invalidated, and emotionally drained. Instead of feeling safe and supported, they feel as though they're walking on eggshells, afraid of triggering another defensive response. Over time, this behavior erodes trust and intimacy, leaving the relationship stuck in a toxic cycle of miscommunication and unresolved tension. The longer defensiveness is allowed to dominate, the more alienated both parties become, trapped in an endless loop of blame and hurt. Criticism. Criticism, when excessive or harsh, becomes a red flag that can slowly suffocate the self-esteem and confidence of those on the receiving end. At its core, criticism is the act of pointing out flaws, mistakes, or shortcomings, but when it's done in a damaging way, it serves not to help, but to tear down. It often disguises itself as helpful feedback, but over time, it becomes a constant barrage of negativity, focused more on the person than the issue at hand. Instead of constructive criticism that encourages growth, it's an unrelenting stream of judgment that leaves no room for improvement or understanding. The emotional toll of constant criticism is heavy. It chips away at one's sense of self-worth, making the victim question their abilities, choices, and even their value as a person. When someone is criticized repeatedly, they begin to feel as though they can do nothing right. Every attempt, no matter how small, is met with disdain or disapproval, creating a cycle of insecurity and self-doubt. It's not just the words that sting, it's the feeling that nothing you do will ever be enough. In relationships, criticism creates an atmosphere of fear and inadequacy. The person being criticized becomes defensive, withdrawing emotionally or trying to please the critic to avoid further pain. Instead of fostering an environment of growth or open communication, criticism shuts down dialogue, replacing it with anxiety and frustration. Over time, it leads to emotional exhaustion as the person on the receiving end feels trapped in a cycle of judgment, never able to truly be themselves without fear of criticism. Avoidance. Avoidance is a subtle but powerful red flag that quietly eats away at the fabric of a relationship. It manifests in the refusal to confront issues, address feelings, or face uncomfortable situations. Instead of engaging in open communication or working through conflict, the person who practices avoidance seeks to escape, whether by withdrawing emotionally, evading tough conversations, or physically distancing themselves. This behavior often feels like a silent rejection, leaving the other person in a state of confusion and frustration, unsure of where they stand or why their concerns are being ignored. The emotional toll of avoidance is immense. When someone avoids you, it's not just the absence of resolution, it's the emotional silence that follows. You are left to process your feelings alone, with no opportunity to understand or work through the issue at hand. Every attempt to reach out feels like an uphill battle, only for the person to retreat further into their shell, leaving you questioning whether they truly care enough to make things right. Over time, this creates a sense of disconnection and emotional isolation as you begin to feel invisible in the relationship. Avoidance can also breed resentment. When issues are never addressed, they accumulate like dust under a rug. What starts as a minor problem can grow into a major wedge between you and the other person, all because they continuously refuse to engage or take responsibility. The more avoidance is used as a coping mechanism, the more it erodes trust and emotional intimacy, making it harder for the relationship to thrive. The lingering uncertainty and unresolved tension become an invisible weight that both parties carry, but only one is refusing to face it. Chronic punctuality issues. Chronic punctuality issues may seem like a minor inconvenience at first, but over time, they reveal deeper patterns of disrespect and disregard for others. At its core, this behavior is a failure to value other people's time, demonstrating a lack of consideration for commitments, schedules, and responsibilities. When someone repeatedly arrives late, whether for meetings, events, or even casual plans, it sends a message that their time is more important than yours. This consistent disregard for punctuality slowly chips away at trust and mutual respect, creating frustration and resentment in those who are repeatedly left waiting. In relationships, whether personal or professional, punctuality is a sign of reliability and respect. When someone chronically fails to show up on time, it creates an environment of uncertainty and frustration. The person on the receiving end is left feeling unimportant, as though their time doesn't matter. The emotional toll of this behavior is significant. It makes you question whether the person values your relationship or if you are just an afterthought in their busy, disorganized life. Over time, it builds a sense of emotional neglect, where your needs are overlooked in favor of their own disorganization. The longer chronic tardiness continues, the harder it is to maintain any sense of trust or dependability. Small delays become larger issues, creating a rift that's difficult to bridge. You begin to feel like your time is expendable, and eventually, the repeated disappointments lead to a loss of faith in the person's commitment to the relationship. Chronic punctuality issues might seem trivial, but they have a powerful way of undermining confidence and creating emotional distance, leaving both parties feeling unimportant and undervalued. Stealing credit. Stealing credit is a manipulative red flag that undermines trust, respect, and collaboration in any relationship, whether personal or professional. At its core, it's the act of taking credit for someone else's ideas, work, or accomplishments, often without acknowledgement or recognition of the original contributor. It can start with small things, like claiming an idea as your own in a meeting, but over time, it becomes a pattern that robs others of their hard-earned validation and recognition. The person who steals credit seeks to elevate their own status at the expense of others, creating a false narrative about their own contributions. The emotional toll of having your credit stolen is deeply painful. It's not just about losing recognition, it's about feeling invisible, unappreciated, and betrayed by someone you trusted. You pour your energy, effort, and time into something, only for someone else to reap the rewards, leaving you questioning your own worth. It strips away any sense of fairness, making it feel like no matter how much you give, someone will always take what's rightfully yours without a second thought. In the workplace, this behavior creates toxic environments where collaboration is stifled and morale is crushed. It fosters resentment as colleagues feel undercut and undervalued. Relationships become strained as trust erodes and a sense of loyalty is replaced with bitterness and suspicion. What once may have been a shared accomplishment becomes a battleground for recognition, leaving those involved emotionally drained and disillusioned. Stealing credit isn't just an act of selfishness, it's an emotional betrayal that leaves scars long after the moment has passed. Social media obsession. Social media obsession is a modern red flag that has deeply woven itself into many relationships, often without either party realizing its detrimental effects. At its core, it is the overuse or excessive dependence on social media platforms to gain validation, attention, or escape from real-world issues. The person who is obsessed with social media often prioritizes online interactions over face-to-face connections, seeking approval through likes, comments, and followers. This need for digital affirmation can become all-consuming, leaving little room for meaningful in-person relationships or genuine emotional investment in those around them. The emotional toll of social media obsession is profound. It creates a false sense of connection as the person becomes more focused on curating a perfect online persona rather than engaging with the people around them. Every moment, every experience is filtered through the lens of social media, with more attention given to how it will be perceived by others than to how it truly feels in the moment. This constant need for validation leaves the person emotionally empty, as the approval they receive is often fleeting and superficial, making them chase after more likes, more followers, and more attention. For those involved with someone who is obsessed with social media, it can feel like they are competing with an invisible audience. The constant distractions and comparison to others online create an emotional disconnect, as the person seems more invested in their digital identity than in their real-world relationships. Over time, this obsession can lead to insecurity, anxiety, and feelings of neglect, as the person becomes increasingly lost in the pursuit of virtual recognition, leaving little room for true emotional connection or intimacy in the real world. Self-centeredness. Self-centeredness is a deeply isolating and frustrating red flag that can undermine relationships and create an emotional void between people. At its core, self-centeredness is the relentless focus on one's own needs, desires, and perspectives, often at the expense of others. A self-centered individual tends to view the world through the lens of "what's in it for me," and places their own experiences, feelings, and desires above those of anyone else. They struggle to empathize, rarely taking the time to understand or consider the emotions or needs of others. In conversations, the self-centered person dominates the discussion, steering everything back to themselves and their experiences. They rarely ask questions or show genuine interest in what others have to say. They may seem uninterested or dismissive when others share their thoughts, and when they do acknowledge others, it's often with the intent of making the conversation about their own perspective. Over time, this behavior erodes the connection in relationships, making those around them feel invisible, unappreciated, and exhausted by the constant need to cater to someone else's emotional world. The emotional toll of self-centeredness is significant. It creates a one-sided dynamic where your needs are overlooked and your efforts go unnoticed. Instead of building mutual understanding and support, the relationship becomes a cycle of giving without receiving. It's draining to invest in someone who can't reciprocate, leaving you feeling emotionally depleted and disconnected. Self-centeredness closes the door to real intimacy, leaving only a hollow space where true connection should be. The self-centered person isn't just blind to others. They actively block the possibility of understanding or caring. Guilt tripping. Guilt tripping is a manipulative and toxic red flag that twists emotions to control and coerce others. At its core, guilt tripping involves making someone feel responsible for another person's discomfort or emotions even when they have no reason to feel guilty. The person employing this tactic uses emotional manipulation, intentionally invoking feelings of shame, regret, or obligation to get what they want. It's a subtle but powerful form of control where the victim is made to feel like their actions, or lack thereof, are causing harm, even if they aren't at fault. The guilt tripper often uses phrases like, "After everything I've done for you," or "You're the only one who can help me," to exploit their victim's sense of responsibility. They play on emotions, stirring up self-doubt and pity, creating a false narrative where the victim becomes the one at fault for everything that goes wrong. What starts as a small request can quickly spiral into manipulation, with the victim being made to feel like a bad person for simply having boundaries or refusing to comply. The emotional toll of guilt tripping is immense. Over time, it erodes a person's confidence, making them second-guess their decisions and feel responsible for other people's emotions. It fosters a sense of emotional indebtedness, where the victim constantly feels like they owe something, even when they've done nothing wrong. Guilt tripping keeps the victim in a perpetual state of anxiety and self-doubt as they try to navigate a relationship that feels more like an emotional trap than a partnership. Secrecy. Secrecy is a red flag that casts a shadow over trust, turning relationships into fragile, uncertain spaces where openness is replaced by hidden truths. At its core, secrecy is the deliberate withholding of information, whether it's about past experiences, current actions, or future intentions. The person who keeps secrets creates walls around themselves, choosing silence over transparency and leaving others in the dark. Initially, secrecy might be dismissed as harmless or as a personal right to privacy, but over time, it becomes a breeding ground for suspicion, doubt, and mistrust. In relationships, secrecy often manifests as subtle omissions or vague explanations, where the truth is selectively shared, leaving key pieces of information concealed. This behavior makes others feel excluded or deceived, creating a sense of imbalance where one person holds power over the other. It fosters an emotional disconnect as the person on the receiving end is left wondering what's being hidden and why. The weight of secrecy builds over time, eroding the sense of security and intimacy that should exist between two people. What starts as a small secret can grow into a larger, more significant issue as trust is eroded and communication is strained. The emotional toll of secrecy is profound. It breeds a constant undercurrent of anxiety, making it difficult to fully engage in the relationship or feel emotionally safe. As secrets accumulate, the person being kept in the dark may start doubting not just the other person's honesty, but their own judgment and intuition. The more secrets that are kept, the more isolated and uncertain the relationship becomes. Secrecy, when left unchecked, leaves relationships fractured, with trust irreparably damaged and the emotional connection lost. Mood instability. Mood instability is a volatile red flag that creates an unpredictable emotional landscape, leaving those around the person walking on eggshells, unsure of what to expect next. At its core, mood instability involves rapid and intense shifts in emotions, often without clear triggers or explanations. One moment, the person may be happy and engaging, and the next, they could be irritable, sad, or even angry. These shifts can feel like a storm brewing with no warning, making it difficult for others to know how to respond or what kind of emotional environment they will step into. The emotional toll of living with someone who has mood instability is exhausting. The people around them often feel emotionally drained as they must constantly adjust to the shifting tides of their moods. Conversations become tense as others try to navigate the emotional landmine of unpredictable reactions. What was once a simple interaction can spiral into confusion or conflict as the person's mood swings make it difficult to maintain a sense of stability or understanding. It creates an atmosphere of constant tension where it's hard to feel safe, comfortable, or confident in the relationship. In relationships, mood instability can lead to a sense of emotional whiplash, where the highs are thrilling but the lows are draining. The uncertainty of never knowing where you stand leaves you questioning your actions, trying to predict how to prevent a sudden outburst or emotional retreat. Over time, this emotional unpredictability causes anxiety, erodes trust, and makes it difficult to nurture a relationship grounded in calm and mutual understanding. Mood instability can strip away a sense of emotional safety, leaving those involved in a state of constant emotional turbulence. Financial control. Financial control is a particularly insidious red flag that can leave deep emotional scars, as it manipulates one of the most fundamental aspects of independence, your financial autonomy. At its core, financial control is the act of one person dictating or limiting how the other manages their money, often using it as a tool for dominance or manipulation. The person exerting financial control may restrict access to funds, monitor spending, or use money as a means to force dependence, making the other feel powerless or trapped. Over time, this behavior erodes confidence and fosters insecurity, as the victim is made to feel incapable of managing their own finances or making decisions for themselves. The emotional toll of financial control is profound. It creates a sense of isolation, as the person being controlled is often unable to make decisions independently or act without fear of financial repercussions. Whether it's dictating how much money is spent, who it's spent on, or even preventing access to basic resources, financial control breeds an environment of stress and anxiety. The victim starts to feel trapped, their autonomy stripped away, as their ability to support themselves or have financial freedom is taken from them. Over time, financial control can lead to a loss of self-worth and independence. The person on the receiving end begins to doubt their abilities and their right to make choices. The cycle of dependence continues as the manipulator tightens their grip, fostering a toxic atmosphere where the victim feels inadequate and constantly reliant on someone else for their financial well-being. It's not just about money, it's about power, control, and the emotional devastation that comes with having your financial freedom stripped away. Self-absorption. Self-absorption is a red flag that leaves little room for others in a relationship, as it centers entirely on the needs, desires, and experiences of one individual. At its core, self-absorption is a deep preoccupation with oneself, where a person's thoughts and actions are overwhelmingly focused on their own world, often ignoring or dismissing the feelings and perspectives of others. This behavior makes others feel invisible, as their needs, emotions, and experiences take a backseat to the self-absorbed person's constant pursuit of validation, attention, and admiration. In conversation, the self-absorbed individual dominates every exchange, rarely showing interest in others or their lives. They speak about themselves incessantly, often with little regard for what's going on in the world around them. They may even interrupt others or redirect conversations back to their own interests and problems, making it clear that their perspective is the only one that matters. Over time, this can leave friends, family, or partners feeling neglected, unimportant, and emotionally drained. The emotional toll of self-absorption is significant. It creates an imbalance in relationships where one person's emotional needs are constantly prioritized while the other is left feeling unseen, unheard, and undervalued. This behavior isolates the self-absorbed individual as genuine connection and empathy are lost. Instead of building mutual respect and understanding, self-absorption fosters a sense of loneliness where one person's constant need for attention and admiration overshadows the very foundation of healthy relationships. Reciprocity, emotional dismissal. Emotional dismissal is a toxic red flag that can slowly suffocate the emotional well-being of anyone caught in its grip. At its core, emotional dismissal is the act of invalidating or ignoring someone's feelings, making them feel as though their emotions are unimportant or unworthy of attention. Instead of offering empathy, understanding, or support, the person dismisses what you're feeling with comments like, "You're overreacting," or "It's not a big deal," making you question the validity of your emotions and your place in the relationship. In relationships, emotional dismissal is deeply damaging. When someone repeatedly brushes aside your feelings or responds with indifference, it creates a sense of isolation and confusion. You begin to feel invisible, as though your emotional needs don't matter, leaving you with the haunting thought that maybe you're the problem for even having feelings in the first place. The person who engages in emotional dismissal often doesn't understand or refuses to understand the importance of validating their partner's emotional experience. They might react with frustration or defensiveness, making the issue about themselves rather than taking the time to listen and understand. The emotional toll of dismissal is insidious. Over time, you start to feel like you're walking on eggshells, unsure of when your emotions will be downplayed or rejected. Instead of seeking comfort and connection, you begin to feel alienated and unimportant. Emotional dismissal erodes self-esteem, causing you to question your worth and the value of your emotions. It leads to an emotional disconnect where intimacy and trust are lost, leaving a relationship hollow and emotionally starved. Inferiority complex. An inferiority complex is a deeply rooted red flag that creates a toxic and emotionally draining environment for both the person suffering from it and those around them. At its core, an inferiority complex involves a pervasive feeling of inadequacy and self-doubt, where the individual constantly compares themselves to others and feels inferior. No matter how much they achieve or how much validation they receive, they are consumed by the belief that they are not good enough. This internal struggle often manifests as defensiveness, jealousy, or even a need to belittle others in an attempt to elevate their own sense of self-worth. The emotional impact of being around someone with an inferiority complex is draining. Their constant need for reassurance and validation can feel like a heavy burden, leaving you exhausted from trying to lift them up. They often dismiss compliments or recognition, downplaying their own achievements because they feel undeserving of praise. Over time, this creates a one-sided dynamic where you are emotionally invested in trying to help them feel better, but they may never truly believe in their own worth. Instead of seeing their value, they focus on their perceived flaws, which only deepens their insecurity and creates a cycle of emotional exhaustion. In relationships, the person with an inferiority complex may project their feelings of inadequacy onto others, creating tension, jealousy, or self-sabotaging behavior. They may struggle to accept love or affection, always doubting its authenticity, and may push others away to avoid feeling vulnerable. The constant need for validation, combined with their refusal to acknowledge their strengths leads to emotional instability, where both parties are left feeling stuck in a cycle of unfulfilled needs and unresolved insecurities. Mind games. Mind games are one of the most emotionally destructive red flags, as they manipulate not just the actions, but the very thoughts and perceptions of the victim. At its core, mind games are tactics used to confuse, control, or manipulate someone's mental state, forcing them to question their reality, emotions, and judgment. These psychological manipulations can come in many forms: contradictory statements, gaslighting, creating doubt, or playing with your emotions to make you feel uncertain or off balance. The goal is to undermine your confidence and self-esteem, leaving you emotionally vulnerable and dependent on the manipulator. The impact of mind games is deeply unsettling. Over time, they erode your sense of self and distort your view of the world around you. You begin to second-guess your feelings, questioning whether you're being too sensitive or if your perceptions are flawed. The manipulator might twist your words or intentions, making you feel like you're always the one in the wrong, even when you know you're not. This constant mental strain can make you feel like you're walking on eggshells, unsure of what is real or what has been deliberately altered to fit someone else's agenda. Mind games make it nearly impossible to trust your instincts, leading to a deep sense of confusion, frustration, and helplessness. You may find yourself apologizing for things you didn't do or trying to explain things that don't need an explanation simply to avoid conflict. In the long run, the emotional cost of being involved in mind games is immense. The constant manipulation chips away at your confidence, leaving you emotionally drained, disconnected from your own sense of truth, and desperate for clarity that never seems to come. Jealous provocation. Jealous provocation is a destructive red flag that subtly manipulates emotions by deliberately inciting jealousy in others. At its core, this behavior is about creating emotional turbulence, specifically by provoking feelings of insecurity, possessiveness, or envy. The individual who engages in jealous provocation often does so for control, to test someone's loyalty, or simply for the emotional satisfaction of watching someone else struggle with jealousy. They might flirt with others in front of you, mention past relationships in casual conversation, or make comments that highlight potential threats to your connection. This tactic is cruel because it plays on a person's vulnerabilities, pushing them into an emotional corner where they feel compelled to compete for attention or affection. The jealous provoker might deny doing anything wrong, claiming they were just being friendly or didn't mean to upset you, yet their actions are carefully calculated to spark a reaction. The goal isn't just to create tension, it's to control the emotional atmosphere by making you feel insecure, and in doing so, they gain power over you. The emotional toll of jealous provocation is profound. It triggers doubt, anxiety, and a sense of inadequacy, leaving you questioning your worth and your relationship. Over time, it erodes trust and makes every interaction feel like a test. The constant emotional manipulation leaves you exhausted, as you're always on edge, trying to decipher their motives and wondering if your feelings are being deliberately played with. Instead of fostering love and trust, jealous provocation breeds insecurity and resentment, creating a toxic cycle of emotional warfare. Privacy invasion. Privacy invasion is a red flag that violates the very core of personal boundaries, eroding trust and creating an environment of discomfort and control. At its core, privacy invasion is the act of intruding into someone's personal space, information, or thoughts without permission, often masked under the guise of care or concern. Whether it's reading personal messages, snooping through belongings, or pressuring someone to reveal private thoughts or feelings, this behavior signals a profound lack of respect for autonomy and trust. In relationships, privacy invasion manifests in various ways. It might start innocently enough, a partner checking your phone without asking, a friend prying into your personal matters when you haven't volunteered the information, or someone demanding access to your accounts or passwords. These actions, though seemingly minor in the moment, create a sense of vulnerability and violation that can't be easily undone. The person who invades your privacy disregards your need for confidentiality and control over your own life, making you feel powerless and constantly on edge, as though your personal world is no longer yours to protect. The emotional impact of privacy invasion is profound. It leaves you feeling exposed, as if there's nowhere left to hide, no safe space where you can truly be yourself. Trust is shattered, and anxiety replaces the comfort and security that should exist in any relationship. Over time, this constant intrusion undermines intimacy, as you are left questioning whether your thoughts, feelings, and actions are truly private or open for someone else to scrutinize. Privacy invasion creates a toxic atmosphere of surveillance and control, leaving the victim feeling suffocated and powerless. Grudge-Holding. Grudge-holding is a destructive red flag that poisons relationships and creates an environment of unresolved tension and resentment. At its core, holding a grudge means clinging to past wrongs, refusing to forgive, and continuously revisiting old wounds instead of letting go. This behavior turns minor conflicts into ongoing sources of pain, where every disagreement or mistake becomes a potential weapon to be used in future arguments. The person holding the grudge may act as though the issue is resolved, but deep down, they are silently nurturing anger, bitterness, and a desire for retribution. The emotional toll of grudge holding is immense. It creates a sense of emotional stagnation, where the past continues to haunt the present. Each time the person revisits old grievances, it stirs up old feelings of hurt and betrayal, preventing the relationship from moving forward. Instead of growing together, the relationship becomes trapped in a cycle of emotional baggage. Every new issue becomes a reminder of previous wrongs, and it becomes impossible to feel emotionally safe or truly understood. In relationships, grudge holding fosters mistrust and emotional distance. Instead of dealing with the pain in an open, healthy way, the person silently builds walls, refusing to let go of the hurt. Over time, this creates an atmosphere of fear, where no one feels free to make mistakes or express vulnerability without fear of it being used against them later. The weight of unresolved issues becomes unbearable, leaving the relationship emotionally drained and suffocating. Grudge holding prevents healing and growth, leaving both parties stuck in the past, unable to move forward. Condescension. Condescension is a deeply frustrating and emotionally damaging red flag that manifests in a person's behavior when they intentionally lower themselves above others, often in subtle and disguised ways. At its core, condescension is about making others feel inferior or unworthy, often by belittling their thoughts, feelings, or actions. This behavior may appear as patronizing comments, eye-rolling, or speaking to someone as if they are incapable of understanding simple concepts, even when they are perfectly competent. The condescending person subtly implies that they are smarter, more capable, or more important than those around them, which gradually erodes the confidence and self-worth of others. The emotional impact of condescension is profound. Over time, you start to feel small, inadequate, and undeserving of respect. What once may have been an empowering conversation or relationship turns into a one-sided dynamic, where one person's words and actions continually put you down while they elevate themselves. You begin to doubt your abilities, questioning your knowledge or self-esteem because of the constant reminders that you are somehow less than the other person. This erosion of confidence is insidious, as condescension is often cloaked in a guise of concern or helpfulness, making it harder to recognize and confront. Living with condescension can feel suffocating. The constant emotional microaggressions, whether deliberate or unconscious, create a toxic environment that makes you hesitant to share your thoughts or take risks. The more you endure this kind of treatment, the more isolated and self-conscious you may become, doubting your worth in ways that never would have occurred if not for the subtle but pervasive nature of condescension. The relationship becomes less about mutual respect and more about reinforcing power imbalances. Unnecessary competition. Unnecessary competition is a toxic red flag that transforms relationships into battlegrounds, where every interaction becomes a test of superiority rather than mutual support. At its core, unnecessary competition is the relentless need to outdo others, even in situations where collaboration or simple enjoyment would be more appropriate. This behavior often stems from insecurity or a desire for validation, where the individual feels the need to prove themselves superior, even when it's not warranted or needed. In relationships, unnecessary competition can manifest in subtle yet damaging ways. The person might downplay your achievements or constantly try to one-up your successes with their own stories of triumph. Simple activities like sharing a fun experience or discussing a personal victory can turn into a race for the spotlight, where nothing you do seems to measure up. Instead of celebrating each other's successes, the competition creates division, making everything feel like a comparison rather than a partnership. The emotional toll of unnecessary competition is draining. It chips away at self-esteem, leaving you feeling like you're constantly trying to prove your worth. Instead of feeling supported or celebrated, you're left feeling as though your accomplishments are never enough. This creates an environment of rivalry, where the bond between individuals is strained and genuine connection becomes nearly impossible. The constant need to compete creates tension, resentment, and exhaustion, turning what should be a cooperative relationship into a never-ending struggle for dominance. Lack of support. A lack of support is one of the most emotionally draining red flags in any relationship. At its core, it represents the absence of empathy, encouragement, and partnership when it's needed most. In a healthy relationship, support is the bedrock on which trust, connection, and growth are built. It's the feeling that, no matter what challenges you face, you have someone by your side offering comfort, advice, or simply a listening ear. When support is lacking, however, you're left feeling alone, unsupported, and often invisible, even if you're surrounded by people. In relationships, a lack of support shows up in various ways, whether it's neglecting to be there during difficult times, failing to celebrate your successes, or not offering help when you're struggling. The person who provides little to no support might dismiss your needs, fail to acknowledge your efforts, or show no genuine concern for your emotional well-being. This lack of involvement can create an emotional void, leaving you feeling like you're carrying the weight of the world on your own, with no one to share it with. The emotional toll is significant. When you consistently lack support from those closest to you, it breeds feelings of loneliness and inadequacy. You begin to question your worth, wondering why you're not receiving the encouragement and validation you deserve. Over time, this absence of support can leave you feeling emotionally drained, as if you're constantly giving but never receiving in return. A lack of support doesn't just hurt, it creates an emotional chasm that weakens the foundation of the relationship, making it difficult to trust, grow, or feel truly connected. Discomforting behavior. Discomforting behavior is a red flag that manifests in ways that make others feel uneasy, anxious, or unsafe in their presence. At its core, it refers to actions, words, or attitudes that create an uncomfortable environment, whether intentionally or unintentionally. This could be physical, such as invading someone's personal space, or emotional, where a person consistently makes others feel awkward, judged, or belittled. Discomforting behavior often leaves a lasting impression, where the victim feels unsettled, questioning their own boundaries, or unsure of how to respond. The emotional toll of discomforting behavior is profound. It can cause anxiety, insecurity, and a constant sense of vigilance, as you never know when you'll be placed in an uncomfortable or unnerving situation. Whether it's someone making inappropriate comments, pushing your boundaries, or creating tension through passive-aggressive actions, the impact of such behavior slowly erodes your sense of safety and trust. Over time, you begin to dread interactions with the person, not because of any direct confrontation, but because of the unease they generate with their presence. In relationships, discomforting behavior creates an emotional disconnect, where genuine communication becomes impossible. Instead of feeling at ease with each other, you're left with a constant sense of tension and stress, unsure of where the person's actions are leading or how they truly feel. It damages intimacy and connection, as it forces the other person to remain on high alert, always navigating the uncomfortable undercurrents that persist beneath the surface. The longer this behavior is tolerated, the more emotionally draining it becomes, leaving a relationship that lacks warmth, understanding, and mutual respect. Contradiction. Contradiction is a red flag that can slowly destabilize any relationship, creating confusion and emotional turmoil. At its essence, contradiction occurs when someone repeatedly says or does things that directly conflict with their previous statements, actions, or beliefs. This inconsistency is often subtle at first. Perhaps they say one thing but act in a completely different way. Over time, these contradictions begin to pile up, leaving the other person feeling unsure of what to believe or what to expect. The manipulator may even deny their own previous words, making it impossible for you to hold them accountable or engage in a meaningful conversation about the discrepancies. The emotional toll of contradiction is disorienting. You begin to question your own judgment and memory, wondering if you misheard or misunderstood things. The more contradictions there are, the more your confidence in your perception of reality erodes. This causes self-doubt as you try to reconcile what was said with what is being done, and the more you try to bring it up, the more you're made to feel like you're the one at fault. What once seemed like a relationship based on trust and understanding starts to feel like a constant puzzle you can never solve. Living with contradiction breeds uncertainty. You can never be sure of where you stand, and every conversation feels like walking on shaky ground. What begins as minor inconsistencies gradually builds into a pattern of behavior that destabilizes your emotional security, leaving you constantly questioning whether the other person is sincere or whether they are purposefully keeping you off balance. In the end, contradiction creates an environment where communication breaks down and trust becomes a fragile illusion. Double standard. A double standard is a deeply frustrating and unfair red flag that creates a toxic imbalance in relationships. At its core, a double standard occurs when different rules or expectations are applied to similar situations based on arbitrary factors like gender, status, or personal bias. The individual who operates with a double standard holds others to one set of rules while exempting themselves from the same scrutiny or responsibility. This behavior is often subtle but deeply damaging, as it creates an atmosphere of injustice and inequality. In relationships, a double standard can show up in many ways. The person may expect you to be perfectly punctual, responsible, or considerate, while they disregard the same expectations for themselves. They might demand transparency and honesty from you, but refuse to offer the same in return. A double standard can also manifest in how they treat others versus how they treat you, creating an environment where your needs and boundaries are less important than theirs. Over time, this inconsistency chips away at trust, making you feel as though you're being held to an unfair standard, while the other person enjoys freedom from the same accountability. The emotional toll of a double standard is heavy. It fosters resentment, frustration, and confusion, leaving you questioning your worth and the fairness of the relationship. The constant imbalance undermines your self-esteem and makes you feel like your efforts and actions are never valued as much as theirs. Instead of fostering mutual respect, a double standard breeds inequality, making the relationship feel more like a one-sided struggle for fairness than a partnership built on trust and reciprocity. Blame shifting. Blame shifting is one of the most frustrating and emotionally damaging red flags in any relationship. At its core, it's the refusal to take responsibility for one's actions and instead pushing the blame onto others. This behavior often arises when someone is confronted with their mistakes, but instead of owning up to them, they deflect and manipulate the situation, making you feel responsible for things that are beyond your control. The goal is simple: avoid accountability at all costs, even if it means hurting others in the process. In relationships, blame shifting creates an endless cycle of frustration and resentment. Rather than engaging in productive conversations or resolving conflict, the person who shifts blame constantly redirects any issue back onto you. They might accuse you of causing their problems, exaggerate your faults, or even twist the truth to make themselves appear innocent. The emotional toll of this behavior is immense. It erodes trust and makes you feel like you're constantly walking on eggshells, unsure of what's real and what's being distorted. No matter how much you try to resolve the issue, you end up feeling like the problem is always yours to fix. Over time, blame shifting damages the very foundation of communication and emotional intimacy. You start doubting your own perspective and questioning whether you're to blame for everything that goes wrong. This behavior leaves you emotionally drained as you find yourself perpetually defending your actions instead of having the space to express your feelings or work together on solutions. Blame shifting isn't just a defense mechanism, it's a weapon that chips away at trust and leaves relationships fractured with no clear path forward. Backstabbing. Backstabbing is a deeply destructive red flag that can shatter trust and create a toxic atmosphere in any relationship, whether personal or professional. At its core, backstabbing involves betraying someone's trust by secretly undermining them, often for personal gain or to manipulate a situation in one's favor. This behavior is typically done behind the victim's back, ensuring that they remain unaware of the betrayal until the damage is already done. The person who backstabs may appear friendly and supportive to your face, but is actively working against you when you're not looking, spreading rumors, sharing confidential information, or sabotaging your efforts. The emotional impact of backstabbing is devastating. It strikes at the very heart of trust, leaving the victim feeling deeply hurt, vulnerable, and betrayed. It's not just the act itself that causes pain, but the realization that someone you believe to be an ally or friend was secretly working to undermine you. This betrayal creates a ripple effect, making it difficult to trust others in the future and leading to feelings of isolation and insecurity. The person being backstabbed is often left questioning their own judgment, wondering how they missed the signs or if they ever truly meant anything to the person who betrayed them. In relationships, backstabbing fosters a climate of fear and suspicion. It breeds divisiveness, making it nearly impossible to feel emotionally safe or secure. The emotional toll is exhausting as the victim becomes hypervigilant, second-guessing every interaction and wondering who else might be betraying them. Backstabbing doesn't just harm the relationship, it leaves deep emotional scars that can take years to heal, preventing trust from being fully restored. Conditional relationships. Conditional relationships are a red flag that can slowly suffocate emotional connection as they operate on the premise that love, affection, or care is contingent upon meeting specific expectations or conditions. At their core, these relationships thrive on a system of rewards and punishments, where the affection or attention given is based on how well the other person performs, behaves, or conforms to certain standards. The love or support is conditional, given only when it suits the other person's needs or desires, rather than being freely offered as part of a genuine, unconditional bond. The emotional toll of a conditional relationship is heavy. You begin to feel like you're constantly walking a tightrope, adjusting your behavior, opinions, or actions to meet someone else's ever-changing expectations, never truly being loved for who you are. This creates a deep sense of insecurity as you're left wondering whether the person truly cares for you or only values what you can do for them. Instead of feeling supported, you feel like a pawn in someone else's game, always striving to be good enough to earn their affection or approval. The fear of not meeting these conditions can lead to anxiety, self-doubt, and emotional exhaustion. Over time, conditional relationships foster feelings of unfulfillment. The joy of connection turns into a constant cycle of performance, where emotional intimacy is replaced with transactional exchanges. Instead of being seen and valued for your authentic self, you're left questioning whether the relationship would survive without constantly jumping through hoops. In the end, you're left emotionally drained, realizing that love should never be a reward, but a natural, unconditional bond that supports growth and connection. Threats. Threats are one of the most sinister and destructive red flags in human behavior, often wielded as a weapon to control, manipulate, and instill fear. At its core, a threat is a promise of harm, whether emotional, psychological, or physical, designed to force someone into submission or compliance. The person using threats aims to manipulate the situation by creating fear, making the victim feel cornered and powerless. These threats may not always be overt or explicit. They can be veiled in comments like, "You'll regret it if you don't," or "This won't end well for you." Threats are toxic because they undermine a person's sense of security and autonomy. The constant undercurrent of fear and anxiety takes a deep emotional toll, making it difficult to feel safe, whether physically or emotionally. Even if the threat is never carried out, the mere possibility of harm creates a tense, unpredictable environment where the victim is constantly walking on eggshells, unsure of what will trigger the next outburst or demand. The emotional damage caused by threats is profound. It destroys trust, as the victim begins to feel that their well-being is always at risk. Living in this state of fear erodes confidence, leading to self-doubt and insecurity. Over time, the victim may feel trapped, unable to escape the oppressive hold of the person who uses threats as a means of control. Relationships that are built on threats are not healthy. They are built on fear, manipulation, and a complete disregard for the other person's emotional or physical safety. Pattern of failures. A pattern of failures is one of the most insidious red flags, often hidden beneath a facade of good intentions or fleeting promises. At its core, it's the repeated inability to follow through on commitments, goals, or promises, creating a cycle of disappointment and frustration. The person who consistently fails to deliver, whether in their personal or professional life, may excuse their behavior with reasons, justifications, or excuses. But over time, these failures reveal a deeper issue, a lack of accountability, responsibility, and self-awareness. In relationships, a pattern of failures can manifest in many ways. It could be someone who repeatedly promises to make changes or improve, only to fall short every time. Perhaps they repeatedly forget important dates, neglect responsibilities, or fail to meet expectations, leaving others feeling neglected, undervalued, and disillusioned. The emotional toll is immense, as the person on the receiving end feels like they are constantly being let down. They may start doubting their own judgment, questioning whether they are asking for too much or if they're simply caught in a never-ending cycle of broken promises. Over time, the emotional weight of dealing with this pattern builds, creating a sense of hopelessness and disconnection. Trust is eroded as the repeated failures mount up, and the victim is left feeling uncertain, unimportant, and unsupported. A person stuck in a pattern of failures often doesn't recognize the toll their actions are taking on others, and those around them are left constantly trying to pick up the pieces of dreams unfulfilled. This cycle of disappointment doesn't just strain relationships, it slowly chips away at self-esteem, leaving everyone involved wondering if they can ever rely on each other again. Boundary overstep. Boundary overstep is a red flag that can cause deep emotional harm as it reflects a blatant disregard for personal space, limits, and respect in a relationship. At its core, boundary overstep involves violating the physical, emotional, or psychological lines that a person has established to protect their well-being. This can range from something seemingly small, like repeatedly interrupting or making personal comments, to more serious violations, such as invading someone's private space or manipulating their emotions. When someone constantly ignores or dismisses your boundaries, it communicates that your feelings and needs don't matter. The emotional toll of boundary overstep is immense. It creates a constant sense of discomfort and vulnerability, where you feel like your personal space or identity is being infringed upon. The more this behavior occurs, the more you start to question your own worth, wondering if you're allowed to assert yourself or if your limits even matter. It's not just about the violation itself, it's about the emotional labor of constantly defending your boundaries, which can leave you feeling exhausted, anxious, and emotionally drained. In relationships, boundary overstep fosters resentment, frustration, and a lack of trust. It creates an environment where the person being violated may start to feel controlled or disrespected, unable to assert themselves freely. Over time, it can lead to emotional distance, as the victim of boundary violations feels unheard and unimportant. Trust is broken, and the relationship becomes unbalanced, with one person continually taking more than they give. When boundaries are disrespected, emotional safety vanishes, and with it, the foundation of a healthy, respectful relationship. Closed-mindedness. Closed-mindedness is a red flag that creates a barrier to growth, understanding, and connection in relationships. At its core, it is the refusal or inability to entertain new ideas, perspectives, or experiences, often resulting in a rigid, narrow worldview. People who exhibit closed-mindedness are often resistant to change, dismissing alternative viewpoints as unimportant or wrong without even considering them. This can manifest in everyday conversations where they shut down differing opinions, belittle new concepts, or outright refuse to engage with anything that challenges their established beliefs. The emotional toll of closed-mindedness is stifling. It creates an environment where open communication and mutual respect are impossible because every exchange becomes a battleground. When someone is closed-minded, they may react defensively, making you feel invalidated or even inferior for having a different opinion. Over time, this dynamic breeds frustration as you realize that no matter how much you explain or try to broaden their perspective, they remain unmoved and unyielding. It becomes emotionally exhausting to engage with someone who refuses to grow or adapt, and you may start to feel isolated in your own thoughts, unable to connect with them on a deeper level. Closed-mindedness also blocks the potential for growth in relationships. When both parties are unwilling to explore new ideas or perspectives, the relationship becomes stagnant. What could have been a space for mutual learning, respect, and compromise turns into a one-sided dynamic where only one view is allowed to dominate. This limitation creates an emotional disconnect, leaving you feeling trapped in a cycle of frustration as you're constantly confronted with the walls they've built around their own mind. Ingratitude. Ingratitude is a deeply hurtful red flag that undermines the very essence of giving and connection in relationships. At its core, ingratitude is the failure to acknowledge or appreciate the efforts, kindness, or sacrifices made by others. The person who is ungrateful rarely recognizes the emotional or practical investments that others put into their relationship, taking them for granted as though they are entitled to these acts of kindness without any reciprocation or thanks. This behavior often manifests in the form of dismissive comments, a lack of acknowledgement, or outright disregard for the time, energy, and care someone has offered. In personal relationships, ingratitude can feel like a constant slap in the face. You may find yourself giving and giving, whether through support, love, or generosity, only to be met with indifference or neglect. The ungrateful person might focus on what they haven't received, disregarding the fact that others have been there for them time and time again. Over time, this harsh behavior can cause immense emotional strain, leaving you feeling unappreciated, taken for granted, and even resentful. The emotional toll of ingratitude is crushing. It creates a sense of emptiness where you're left wondering if your actions matter at all. Instead of building a sense of mutual respect and reciprocity, ingratitude breeds feelings of insignificance and hurt. It makes you question your worth and the authenticity of the relationship, leading to a deep sense of disillusionment. The constant lack of appreciation leaves you drained, emotionally exhausted, and questioning whether your efforts will ever truly be valued. Gossiping. Gossiping is one of the most toxic red flags in human behavior, often disguised as casual conversation or harmless chatter. At its core, gossiping is the act of discussing others, often behind their backs, with the intention to judge, criticize, or spread information that may not be fully true. It can begin with a simple remark or an offhand comment, but over time, it spirals into a web of rumors, half-truths, and deliberate misinformation. Gossip can feel exhilarating in the moment, especially when it involves secrets or hidden details, but its consequences are deeply damaging. In relationships, gossiping creates an atmosphere of distrust and insecurity. When someone gossips about others, it's only a matter of time before they turn the conversation to you. The person being gossiped about may not even be aware of what's being said, but the emotional impact is undeniable. It makes the person on the receiving end feel violated, disrespected, and isolated. As gossip spreads, it can change how people perceive one another, often based on false information or malicious intent. The victim of gossip is left to navigate a sea of distorted truths, unsure of who to trust. The emotional toll of gossiping is immense. It breeds anxiety, mistrust, and tension in social circles. It divides relationships, causing rifts that are often difficult to repair. Gossiping undermines the very essence of respect and loyalty, leaving individuals to feel small, unimportant, and exposed. In the long run, the person who gossips not only damages others' reputations, but also sabotages their own. The more they indulge in gossip, the more they become known for spreading negativity, ultimately leaving them isolated from those they hurt. Materialism. Materialism is a red flag that distorts priorities and creates an environment where superficial values overshadow deeper connections and meaningful experiences. At its core, materialism involves placing excessive importance on material possessions, wealth, and status, often at the expense of emotional intimacy, personal growth, or relationships. When someone is driven by materialism, their focus is on accumulating possessions or displaying wealth as a measure of self-worth or success, leaving little room for genuine connection or true fulfillment. The emotional toll of materialism is significant. It can leave those around the materialistic person feeling unimportant, as their value is measured by what they own rather than who they are. The constant pursuit of things creates a shallow dynamic in relationships, where love, kindness, and emotional connection are secondary to the desire for the latest gadgets, designer clothes, or social status. Those involved with a materialistic person may begin to feel like they are being used or that their worth is tied to their ability to provide or keep up with material expectations. In relationships, Materialism breeds dissatisfaction, as the person driven by possessions often becomes preoccupied with what they lack rather than appreciating what they have. The focus on wealth and possessions can create tension as material gains take precedence over emotional needs or mutual support. Over time, this creates a cycle of frustration where deeper emotional bonds are overshadowed by the pursuit of fleeting luxuries. Materialism isolates people, preventing true connection and leaving a void that no object or status symbol can fill. Selfishness. Selfishness is a deeply isolating red flag that can slowly erode the foundation of any relationship. At its core, selfishness is the prioritization of one's own needs, desires, and comforts at the expense of others. A selfish person consistently places themselves above everyone else, disregarding the feelings, wants, or well-being of those around them. Their actions often reflect a lack of empathy or consideration for the impact they have on others, and their relationships become more about what they can take rather than what they can give. The emotional toll of selfishness is profound. Over time, the person on the receiving end begins to feel neglected, unimportant, and emotionally depleted. Every interaction feels one-sided as the selfish person expects others to cater to their needs while offering little or no reciprocity, whether it's taking up all the conversation space, demanding constant attention, or expecting others to make sacrifices without ever returning the favor. Selfishness creates an environment where the emotional balance tips in favor of one person, leaving the other to feel invisible or even used. Living with selfishness creates an overwhelming sense of isolation. Instead of being in a relationship where both parties support and care for each other, you're left constantly giving while receiving little in return. The selfish person may not even recognize the toll they're taking, as they are so focused on their own world that they fail to see the emotional exhaustion in others. This imbalance leads to resentment, frustration, and ultimately emotional burnout as you begin to question whether your own needs and feelings matter at all. The more selfish behavior is allowed to persist, the more disconnected and empty the relationship becomes. Interrupting. Interrupting is a subtle but disruptive red flag that signals a lack of respect and consideration for others. At its core, interrupting is about dominating the conversation, cutting others off before they've had a chance to fully express their thoughts or feelings. This behavior isn't just about speaking over someone, it's about dismissing their voice and asserting control over the flow of communication. When someone constantly interrupts, it creates a toxic dynamic where the other person feels unheard, invalidated, and increasingly frustrated. In conversations, interrupting can feel like a constant barrage, leaving little room for meaningful exchange. The interrupter may finish your sentences, disregard your points, or steer the conversation back to their own interests, never giving you a chance to share your perspective. Over time, this behavior erodes trust and connection, as the person who interrupts shows that they value their own words more than yours. It can create an emotional distance, making you feel like your thoughts and feelings don't matter, and you're only there to listen, not to contribute. The emotional impact of interrupting is significant. It fosters a sense of powerlessness and frustration, leaving the interrupted person feeling disregarded and invisible. The more it happens, the more it chips away at self-esteem, making you question whether your opinions are worth sharing at all. Instead of fostering mutual respect and understanding, interrupting undermines communication, creating a toxic atmosphere where one voice always drowns out the other, and genuine connection is impossible. Secrecy in relationships. Secrecy in relationships is one of the most dangerous red flags, silently undermining trust and emotional intimacy. At its core, secrecy is the act of withholding information that should be shared, whether it's about past experiences, current actions, or future intentions. When someone keeps secrets in a relationship, it creates an invisible barrier between the two people, leaving one person in the dark and the other with control over what's real and what's not. While everyone deserves some level of privacy, secrecy, especially when it comes to important matters, can quickly breed suspicion and insecurity. In relationships, secrecy often manifests as intentional omissions or evasions when asked about significant aspects of one's life. The person might be hiding something from their past, concealing their true feelings, or withholding details that are essential for trust and understanding. It can start small, avoiding certain topics or being vague about plans, but as time goes on, these secrets grow, making it harder to bridge the gap between partners. What was once a small omission can eventually turn into a large deception, where nothing feels transparent anymore, leaving the other person constantly questioning what they're not being told. The emotional impact of secrecy is deep and profound. It chips away at the sense of security that every relationship needs. Over time, the person on the receiving end starts to feel more isolated, wondering if they can truly trust their partner. Secrecy breeds doubt and anxiety, making it nearly impossible to feel fully connected. The more secrets are kept, the greater the emotional distance becomes, leaving one person feeling like an outsider in their own relationship. Trust, once broken by secrecy, is one of the hardest things to rebuild, leaving both parties feeling lost and emotionally drained. Family criticism. Family criticism is a toxic red flag that can create an environment of emotional instability, insecurity, and tension. At its core, it involves consistently belittling or judging someone's family, either directly or indirectly, in a way that undermines the individual's connection to their loved ones. Whether it's making derogatory remarks about a partner's family, criticizing their upbringing, or dismissing the importance of their familial bonds, family criticism sends the message that those closest to a person aren't worthy of respect or affection. This can leave the victim feeling torn as they are forced to choose between their family and the person who is attacking them. The emotional toll of family criticism is profound. It breeds feelings of guilt, confusion, and loyalty conflict. When someone criticizes your family, it can feel like they are attacking a fundamental part of who you are. Over time, it can erode your self-esteem as you begin to feel like your values, your history, and your relationships are being invalidated. You may start questioning whether you're wrong to hold those bonds so dear, or whether your loved ones are truly as flawed as you're being told. In relationships, family criticism can create a toxic divide, causing a person to feel constantly torn between the two people they care about. It leads to emotional strain as the victim feels unsupported, misunderstood, and emotionally manipulated. Rather than fostering unity or understanding, family criticism breeds resentment, making it difficult to maintain healthy connections with both their partner and their family. Over time, this creates emotional isolation, where trust and support are eroded, leaving a person questioning the authenticity of their relationships. Unquestionable trust. Unquestionable trust is a dangerous red flag that can quietly poison relationships. At its core, it manifests when someone demands blind trust from others without providing a solid foundation of reliability, honesty, or transparency in return. The person who expects unquestionable trust often operates from a position of authority or control, insisting that they are above reproach and that their word should never be doubted. This demand for unquestioning faith can feel suffocating and manipulative as it shuts down any room for healthy skepticism, questioning, or dialogue. The emotional toll of unquestionable trust is both subtle and profound. When someone asks you to trust them without question, it places you in a vulnerable position, leaving you with no room to critically evaluate their actions or words. Over time, this behavior can breed dependency, where you feel obligated to follow their lead or make decisions based on their judgment, regardless of how it impacts you. The more you give in to this dynamic, the more you risk losing your own voice, as your needs and instincts are sidelined by someone who insists they are always right. In relationships, this dynamic creates an emotional imbalance. You may begin to feel like your thoughts and concerns are dismissed or minimized because you're expected to accept everything they say as truth. This can lead to frustration, resentment, and a deep sense of powerlessness. Ultimately, the person demanding unquestionable trust is not fostering a healthy relationship of mutual respect, but instead creating a toxic atmosphere where control is hidden behind a facade of authority. The longer this red flag persists, the more it chips away at your independence and emotional well-being. Overreaction. Overreaction is a red flag that turns everyday situations into emotional roller coasters, leaving everyone involved feeling drained, confused, and overwhelmed. At its core, overreaction is the tendency to respond to minor issues or inconveniences with exaggerated emotions, anger, distress, or frustration far beyond what the situation warrants. The person who overreacts often escalates situations unnecessarily, making a mountain out of a molehill and dragging others into their emotional whirlwind. In relationships, overreaction can be a constant source of stress. A small disagreement, an innocent mistake, or even a simple miscommunication can trigger an explosive response. The overreacting person may yell, cry, or lash out, leaving the other person stunned and unsure of how to handle the situation. What was supposed to be a brief exchange turns into an emotional battle, with the overreacting individual demanding attention, validation, or an apology for something that doesn't warrant such intensity. Over time, this behavior becomes emotionally exhausting, as it creates an atmosphere of unpredictability and tension. The emotional toll of overreaction is profound. It forces you to walk on eggshells, constantly worried about when the next outburst will happen. It distorts reality, making you question whether your actions are truly worthy of such an intense response. Instead of fostering healthy communication and conflict resolution, overreaction breeds anxiety and frustration, leaving everyone involved feeling emotionally exhausted and disconnected. The constant emotional upheaval keeps the relationship in a state of turmoil, where understanding and resolution become impossible, overshadowed by the overwhelming nature of every response. Excuse-making. Excuse-making is a red flag that can slowly poison any relationship, eroding accountability and fostering frustration. At its core, it's the tendency to constantly deflect blame and avoid taking responsibility for one's actions by offering up a series of justifications, rationalizations, or excuses. Whether it's avoiding obligations, neglecting commitments, or failing to meet expectations, the person who habitually makes excuses never truly owns up to their shortcomings. Instead, they hide behind a wall of excuses, making it impossible for others to hold them accountable or expect genuine change. In relationships, excuse-making manifests as a refusal to take responsibility for mistakes or shortcomings. The person might blame external factors, stress, bad luck, or other people for their failures, rather than acknowledging their role in the situation. This behavior can start with small, seemingly innocent excuses, but quickly snowballs into a pattern of avoidance. Over time, those around them begin to feel like they're never truly being heard or understood. Instead of addressing the problem or working together to find a solution, excuses shift the focus away from the issue at hand and prevent any real progress. The emotional impact of excuse-making is significant. Those on the receiving end often feel dismissed, unheard, and unimportant, as though their feelings and needs are never prioritized. The continuous cycle of excuses creates frustration and disappointment, making it difficult to trust that anything will ever change. Ultimately, excuse-making undermines the foundation of any relationship, as it keeps both parties stuck in a loop of unmet expectations and unresolved issues, leaving everyone emotionally drained and disconnected. Chronic complaining. Chronic complaining is a red flag that can drain the life out of any relationship, turning what should be a space for support and growth into a constant cycle of negativity. At its core, chronic complaining is the habitual expression of dissatisfaction or frustration with every situation, no matter how minor. The person who engages in chronic complaining seems to find fault with everything: their job, their relationships, their surroundings. Nothing is ever good enough. Over time, the constant barrage of complaints creates an emotionally toxic environment where positivity and solutions are overshadowed by endless negativity. The emotional toll of chronic complaining is immense. The person listening to the complaints becomes exhausted, feeling like they are walking through a storm of negativity that never ceases. Instead of constructive conversations, every interaction feels like a battle against an unrelenting wave of dissatisfaction. Instead of focusing on solutions or seeking ways to improve, the chronic complainer focuses on the problems, often spiraling into a place of helplessness or victimhood. This can leave the listener feeling drained, as if no matter how much they try to help, it will never be enough to change the mindset of the complainer. Living with chronic complaining can make you feel emotionally depleted, as the constant negativity chips away at your own outlook on life. It can also create an underlying sense of guilt, as you may feel pressure to fix or alleviate the issues, even when you know that the problem lies within the complainer's mindset. Over time, it becomes difficult to find joy in any interaction, as the focus remains solely on what's wrong, never on what's going right. Chronic complaining turns every situation into a burden, and the relationship becomes consumed by an endless cycle of dissatisfaction that can feel impossible to break. Emotional manipulation. Emotional manipulation is one of the most insidious red flags, as it undermines a person's emotional stability and distorts their perception of reality. At its core, emotional manipulation is the act of exploiting another person's emotions for personal gain, often by making them feel guilty, anxious, or confused. This can take many forms: playing on someone's fears, using guilt as leverage, or manipulating their feelings to control behavior or decisions. The manipulator subtly twists situations, making the victim question their own thoughts, feelings, and judgments, leaving them emotionally drained and unsure of themselves. The emotional toll of manipulation is staggering. Over time, the person being manipulated begins to feel powerless, as if they're constantly walking on eggshells, unable to please the manipulator no matter what they do. The manipulator may use love, affection, or even threats to manipulate the other person into compliance, turning what should be a supportive relationship into an emotionally coercive one. This leads to confusion as the victim starts to doubt their own reality, believing that their emotions or needs are unreasonable or that they're at fault for everything. In relationships, emotional manipulation creates a dynamic of control where the manipulator gains power over the victim's actions, decisions, and emotions. It breaks down trust, leaving the victim emotionally isolated and constantly second-guessing themselves. The longer this behavior persists, the more emotionally damaging it becomes, leading to anxiety, self-doubt, and a loss of personal identity. Emotional manipulation doesn't just hurt in the moment, it leaves lasting scars, making it difficult for the victim to trust others or feel safe in their own emotions ever again. Defensiveness. Defensiveness is a red flag that can turn even the most simple and well-meaning conversations into emotionally charged confrontations. At its core, defensiveness is a refusal to accept criticism, feedback, or differing opinions, often manifesting as quick denials, excuses, or counterattacks. The defensive person reacts to even the slightest hint of critique with hostility or justification, refusing to listen or engage in a productive dialogue. This behavior shuts down communication and prevents any real understanding or growth from taking place. In relationships, defensiveness creates a wall between individuals, making it impossible to resolve conflicts or address issues in a healthy way. Every attempt to discuss problems or express concerns is met with resistance, where the defensive person shifts the focus back to you or finds ways to blame external factors. Instead of listening or reflecting on their actions, they deflect, deny, or minimize the impact of their behavior. Over time, this dynamic becomes exhausting, as one person is left feeling unheard, invalidated, and constantly attacked for simply trying to communicate. The emotional cost of defensiveness is immense. It breeds frustration, confusion, and a sense of hopelessness, as it becomes clear that meaningful conversations or resolutions are impossible. The defensive person's refusal to acknowledge their role in any issue stifles growth and makes it difficult to trust that any real change can occur. Instead of fostering understanding, defensiveness creates emotional distance, where any attempt to connect or resolve conflicts feels like an uphill battle. The constant emotional walls prevent progress, leaving both parties stuck in a cycle of unresolved tension. Entitlement. Entitlement is a red flag that can sour any relationship, creating an unhealthy power dynamic rooted in selfishness and unrealistic expectations. At its core, entitlement is the belief that one deserves special treatment, privileges, or rewards without having to earn them. This behavior often manifests in people who feel they are owed something by others, whether it's attention, respect, or material things, simply because of who they are or what they believe they deserve. The entitled person assumes that the world should revolve around their needs, and when those needs aren't met, they can react with frustration, anger, or even manipulation. The emotional toll of entitlement is severe. It creates an environment where the person with the entitlement mindset takes without giving, expecting others to cater to their desires, while offering little in return. Those around them begin to feel used, as if their time, effort, and feelings are being ignored in favor of someone else's unearned demands. The constant pressure to fulfill the needs of an entitled person can create deep feelings of resentment, as you realize that no matter how much you give, it's never enough to satisfy their ever-growing expectations. Living with entitlement can make you feel emotionally exhausted, trapped in a cycle of giving without receiving any appreciation or reciprocity. It fosters a toxic atmosphere where one person's desires always take precedence over everyone else's, leaving the others feeling small, unseen, and undervalued. Over time, this dynamic erodes the foundation of trust and mutual respect, leaving behind a relationship that feels more like a one-sided transaction than a genuine partnership. Entitlement destroys the balance necessary for healthy reciprocal connections, replacing empathy with selfish demands. Disrespect for authority. Disrespect for authority is a red flag that can disrupt relationships, work environments, and personal growth. At its core, it involves a blatant disregard for rules, guidelines, or the individuals in positions of authority, whether they are teachers, managers, parents, or any other figure of respect. Instead of respecting the structure or leadership in place, the person openly challenges or undermines authority, often with little regard for the consequences. This behavior can manifest as refusal to follow instructions, openly criticizing authority figures, or acting defiantly in the face of rules meant to maintain order or respect. The emotional impact of disrespect for authority is far-reaching. It breeds tension, as others feel the need to constantly correct or challenge the individual in question, leading to a cycle of conflict that can become exhausting. In relationships or workplace settings, this behavior creates a hostile or unproductive atmosphere where teamwork and cooperation are replaced with power struggles and resentment. The constant undermining of authority figures erodes trust, making it difficult to rely on the individual or maintain a sense of stability. In relationships, disrespect for authority often reflects deeper issues with control and rebellion. It can create emotional instability, as the person may dismiss your opinions or needs if they perceive you as an authority figure. It fosters an environment where mutual respect is lacking, and instead of collaboration, there is constant resistance and friction. Over time, this behavior makes it nearly impossible to maintain healthy boundaries, as authority and respect become negotiable concepts rather than fundamental aspects of a functional relationship. Disrespect for authority ultimately leaves a trail of chaos and discontent, making it difficult to build trust or find peace. Insecurity. Insecurity is a deeply unsettling red flag that can slowly unravel the fabric of a relationship, causing emotional turbulence and self-doubt. At its core, insecurity stems from a lack of self-confidence, a fear of being inadequate, or the constant worry that one is not good enough. This fear can manifest in various ways, through jealousy, overcompensating for perceived flaws, or constantly seeking validation from others. While everyone experiences insecurity at times, when it becomes a recurring pattern, it can create a toxic atmosphere where emotional needs are driven by fear rather than trust. In relationships, insecurity often presents itself as jealousy or possessiveness. The insecure person might constantly question their partner's loyalty, seek constant reassurance, or act out of fear that they are being replaced or overlooked. They may become overly clingy or suspicious, reading into innocent actions or words as signs of betrayal. This behavior doesn't just create tension, it suffocates the relationship, making it hard for both parties to feel free, supported, and secure. The emotional toll on the insecure person is immense. They are trapped in a cycle of anxiety and self-doubt, while their partner feels burdened by the constant need to calm their fears and provide validation. The impact on the other person is equally damaging. Being with someone who is insecure can feel like walking on eggshells, as you may constantly worry about triggering their jealousy or making them feel inadequate. Over time, this can lead to frustration, emotional exhaustion, and a sense of being misunderstood. Insecurity, when unchecked, isolates both people, one trapped in a cycle of fear, the other feeling helpless and emotionally drained. It hinders growth, creates doubt, and slowly chips away at the trust and intimacy that every relationship needs to thrive. Narcissism. Narcissism is one of the most damaging red flags in human behavior, characterized by an overwhelming sense of self-importance, a lack of empathy, and an insatiable need for admiration. At its core, narcissism is an extreme focus on oneself, where the individual believes they are entitled to special treatment, constantly seeking validation and adoration from others. This behavior often masks deep insecurities and a fragile sense of self-worth, but it manifests outwardly as arrogance, entitlement, and a disregard for the needs and feelings of those around them. In relationships, narcissism creates an emotional imbalance where one person's needs are always prioritized, leaving the other person feeling invisible, unimportant, and emotionally drained. The narcissist often dominates conversations, turning every interaction into a way to showcase their achievements, talents, or desires, while dismissing or belittling others' experiences. They may manipulate situations to remain the center of attention, and any attempt to address their behavior is met with defensiveness, hostility, or even gaslighting. Genuine care or empathy is often absent, as the narcissist's focus is solely on what others can provide for them, rather than building mutual understanding or connection. The emotional toll of narcissism is significant. It leads to feelings of worthlessness, confusion, and frustration as the narcissist demands constant praise and validation while offering little in return. Over time, this imbalance creates a sense of emotional emptiness, where the victim feels like they are constantly giving without receiving any support, love, or consideration. Narcissism isolates and suffocates, making it difficult to establish healthy, balanced relationships, as the narcissist's need for admiration becomes an unquenchable demand that leaves others feeling neglected, used, and unfulfilled. Monologue. A monologue in a relationship is a powerful red flag, signaling an imbalance where one person's voice dominates the conversation while the other is left unheard. At its core, a monologue is an extended, one-sided speech in which one person continuously talks about themselves, their thoughts, or their experiences with little regard for the other person's input or emotions. It's a subtle form of emotional neglect, where the individual refuses to engage in true dialogue and instead fills the space with their own words, leaving no room for reciprocal sharing or mutual understanding. In relationships, a monologue can appear as an overwhelming need to constantly talk about one's own issues, achievements, or opinions without considering the needs or perspectives of the other person. The individual may dominate discussions, not allowing for breaks in the conversation or for others to express their thoughts. This behavior can be draining as the listener feels increasingly invisible, unable to share their own experiences or emotions. Over time, this dynamic leads to emotional isolation, where one person feels as though their voice and feelings are not valued, leaving them feeling small, unimportant, and unheard. The emotional toll of a monologue is significant. It creates an environment where communication becomes one-sided, leaving the other person emotionally disconnected and frustrated. They may begin to question the depth of the relationship, wondering if their feelings or experiences matter at all. The more the monologue continues, the more the relationship becomes centered around the speaker's needs, while the listener is left in a constant state of emotional depletion. Monologues stifle genuine connection and intimacy, making it impossible for both people to feel truly understood or valued. Recklessness. Recklessness is a dangerous red flag that introduces chaos and instability into relationships, environments, and personal well-being. At its core, recklessness involves taking unnecessary risks without regard for the consequences, whether those consequences affect themselves or others. A reckless person acts impulsively, often without thinking through the impact of their actions, whether it's making poor decisions in the heat of the moment, engaging in risky behaviors, or disregarding safety or common sense. This unpredictability creates an atmosphere of anxiety, as those around them are left wondering when the next irresponsible action will occur. The emotional toll of recklessness is profound. It breeds a constant sense of worry and unease, as those close to the reckless individual fear for their safety, well-being, and stability. In relationships, this behavior can leave the other person feeling emotionally exhausted, having to constantly pick up the pieces after the reckless decisions or actions. The cycle of impulsive behavior creates tension and erodes trust, as it becomes increasingly difficult to rely on someone who regularly makes decisions that threaten emotional or physical security. In relationships, recklessness can lead to a breakdown of communication, as one person feels increasingly disregarded or unsupported by the other's lack of consideration for their feelings or needs. Over time, this creates a toxic dynamic where the responsible person feels like they are always left cleaning up after the chaos caused by the other's reckless actions. This behavior prevents growth, safety, and trust, making it impossible to build a stable, fulfilling relationship or environment. Recklessness leaves emotional scars that are hard to erase, as it constantly undermines stability and safety. Constant competition. Constant competition is a red flag that can turn even the most harmonious relationships into battlegrounds. At its core, this behavior involves an individual who constantly views every situation, achievement, or conversation as an opportunity to compete rather than collaborate. Whether it's subtly undermining your successes or turning everything into a contest, the person caught in this mindset seeks to always be better or on top, even at the expense of genuine connection. Instead of celebrating mutual accomplishments, they make everything feel like a race, where the idea of partnership or teamwork is replaced by rivalry. The emotional toll of constant competition is exhausting. Instead of feeling supported, you begin to feel like you're constantly being compared, belittled, or one-upped. Every conversation, every achievement becomes an opportunity for them to make you feel inferior or to make sure their accomplishments are highlighted as superior. This dynamic leads to feelings of inadequacy and self-doubt, as you're left questioning your own worth every time you achieve something or express yourself. Instead of lifting each other up, the relationship becomes a series of one-upmanship, where love and support take a backseat to the need for validation. Living with constant competition can leave you emotionally drained, as the joy of sharing and celebrating becomes overshadowed by the need to outdo one another. Over time, this behavior destroys trust, collaboration, and connection, replacing what should be a healthy relationship with a toxic, exhausting race to win. The more entrenched this mentality becomes, the more you begin to feel like an opponent in your own life rather than a partner in your shared journey. Disrespecting values. Disrespecting values is a deeply troubling red flag that undermines the very foundation of a healthy relationship. At its core, this behavior involves ignoring, belittling, or outright dismissing the beliefs, principles, and morals that are important to another person. It's a blatant disregard for what someone holds dear, whether it's their religion, cultural background, personal ethics, or emotional boundaries. The person who disrespects values sees these differences not as a means of growth or learning, but as obstacles to be ignored or trivialized in favor of their own views. In relationships, when someone disrespects your values, it creates a toxic environment of invalidation. You may find yourself constantly compromising your beliefs, feeling pressured to change, or even doubting your own worth. The disrespect often manifests in subtle ways, mocking your religion, undermining your traditions, or making dismissive comments about your goals or ambitions. Over time, this behavior chips away at your sense of self, making you feel less understood and less respected. It fosters resentment and disconnect, as the individual shows little regard for the things that make you who you are. The emotional toll of disrespecting values is profound. It breeds frustration, hurt, and a deep sense of being misunderstood or dismissed. Instead of celebrating diversity and growth, this behavior stifles personal expression and fosters division. When your values are disrespected, you are left questioning whether you can ever truly be yourself in the relationship. The constant disregard for your beliefs creates an emotional chasm that grows wider with each incident, making it impossible to feel truly supported, seen, or loved for who you are. Reassurance Dependency. Reassurance dependency is a red flag that can suffocate a relationship with constant emotional demands and insecurity. At its core, it is the relentless need for validation and reassurance from others, driven by a deep-seated fear of inadequacy or uncertainty. The person who exhibits reassurance dependency constantly seeks confirmation of their worth, often asking, "Do you love me?" or "Am I doing okay?" They rely on external validation to feel secure, constantly needing others to affirm their feelings and decisions. While seeking reassurance occasionally is normal, when it becomes a recurring pattern, it becomes draining and emotionally exhausting for both parties involved. In relationships, reassurance dependency manifests as an overwhelming need to be constantly reassured about one's feelings, decisions, or actions. The person may ask the same questions repeatedly, checking for validation even after receiving confirmation. This behavior creates a cycle where the person is never truly at ease, needing endless affirmations to feel safe or valued. Over time, this dependency can lead to emotional exhaustion for the partner, who feels burdened by the constant need to provide reassurance, making it difficult to maintain balance in the relationship. The emotional toll of reassurance dependency is profound. The person who constantly seeks reassurance may begin to feel insecure and unworthy if they don't receive constant validation, causing their self-esteem to erode. On the other hand, the partner may feel frustrated and drained by the pressure to continuously affirm the other person's worth. Over time, this dynamic creates an unhealthy imbalance where one person's emotional well-being hinges entirely on the validation of the other. The relationship becomes one-sided, and true emotional intimacy becomes harder to achieve as the dependency on reassurance builds a wall between authentic connection and constant need. Abuse. Abuse is the most destructive and dangerous red flag, as it undermines the very core of a person's well-being and sense of self-worth. At its core, abuse is a pattern of behavior aimed at gaining power and control over another person, whether through physical violence, emotional manipulation, verbal degradation, or sexual assault. It's not just a single incident, but an ongoing cycle that erodes the victim's sense of safety, autonomy, and dignity. The abuser often uses fear, intimidation, and isolation to maintain control, making it nearly impossible for the victim to escape or seek help. The emotional toll of abuse is immeasurable. It chips away at self-esteem, leaving the victim feeling worthless, afraid, and trapped. Over time, the repeated trauma of being belittled, controlled, or harmed leads to a deep sense of fear and helplessness. Victims of abuse often begin to internalize the abusive behavior, questioning their own worth or believing that they somehow deserve the mistreatment. The constant cycle of tension, violence, and remorse can leave them in a perpetual state of emotional chaos, unable to break free or heal. In relationships, abuse creates an environment of fear and confusion where trust is destroyed and love becomes entangled with pain. The victim may start to isolate themselves from friends or family, feeling ashamed or embarrassed to admit the truth. Abuse slowly erodes their ability to trust others, making it nearly impossible to build healthy, supportive relationships in the future. The scars left by abuse are deep and long-lasting, both emotionally and physically. It's a toxic, life-altering behavior that leaves its victims broken, vulnerable, and often lost in a cycle of self-doubt and fear. Invasion of privacy. Invasion of privacy is one of the most violating and emotionally damaging red flags in any relationship. At its core, it is the act of disregarding someone's personal space, boundaries, or confidential information, often without their knowledge or consent. Whether it's snooping through personal messages, prying into private conversations, or showing up uninvited in personal spaces, the person who invades privacy does so with little respect for the other person's need for autonomy or trust. The goal is often to gain control or insight into things they believe they have a right to know. But this behavior deeply undermines the trust that relationships depend on. The emotional impact of privacy invasion is profound and unsettling. When someone violates your privacy, it sends a clear message that your personal thoughts, feelings, and boundaries do not matter. This can create feelings of betrayal, vulnerability, and helplessness, as the space you once believed was safe and secure becomes compromised. it leads to a constant state of alertness where you feel like nothing is truly private or protected. Trust begins to crumble, and you find yourself second-guessing everything you share, wondering if it will be used against you or scrutinized without your consent. Living with an invader of privacy can make you feel emotionally exposed, unable to freely express yourself or engage in relationships without fear of being watched or judged. The more this behavior continues, the more it wears down your sense of self and erodes the foundation of respect and trust that should be central to any relationship. Privacy is not just about physical boundaries, but emotional ones as well. And when those are violated, the emotional toll can be irreversible, leaving behind a sense of constant betrayal and insecurity. Irresponsibility. Irresponsibility is a red flag that erodes trust, creates chaos, and leaves others to pick up the pieces of someone else's neglect. At its core, irresponsibility is the failure to take ownership of one's actions, decisions, and obligations. The irresponsible person avoids accountability, neglects their duties, and often places the burden of their actions onto others. This can manifest in both personal and professional settings, where promises are broken, commitments are ignored, and problems are left unresolved. In relationships, irresponsibility creates an emotional and practical imbalance, as the responsible partner is often forced to compensate for the other person's lack of initiative or follow-through, whether it's failing to keep promises, neglecting responsibilities, or avoiding important decisions. The irresponsible person causes unnecessary stress and frustration for everyone around them. The emotional weight of constantly having to make up for someone else's carelessness can feel like a never-ending burden, leaving you feeling exhausted, undervalued, and resentful. The emotional toll of irresponsibility is profound. It fosters feelings of frustration and abandonment, as the responsible person is left feeling like they are carrying the weight of the relationship alone. Over time, the pattern of irresponsibility can chip away at the relationship's foundation, causing a breakdown in trust and communication. The lack of accountability makes it impossible to build a solid future together, as one person continually avoids their role in maintaining a healthy, functioning partnership. Irresponsibility creates a cycle of disappointment, leaving the responsible party emotionally drained and questioning whether the relationship can ever thrive. Secrecy. Secrecy is a deeply unsettling red flag that casts a shadow of distrust and uncertainty over any relationship. At its core, secrecy involves hiding information or deliberately withholding the truth, creating an emotional barrier that prevents transparency and connection. Whether it's keeping personal details hidden, concealing intentions, or telling half-truths, secrecy fosters an environment where the truth becomes elusive and the other person is left questioning what is real. It often feels like a subtle betrayal, as the act of concealing something important leaves others in the dark, unsure of where they stand. The emotional toll of secrecy is profound. It breeds feelings of anxiety, confusion, and isolation, as those on the receiving end begin to doubt their partner's sincerity or trustworthiness. When someone is secretive, it forces others to question whether they are being deceived or manipulated, planting seeds of doubt and insecurity. Instead of feeling secure and emotionally safe, the person left in the dark is left grappling with uncertainty, wondering why they're being kept out of the loop or if there's something fundamentally wrong with the relationship. In relationships, secrecy creates emotional distance, as communication is compromised and genuine intimacy becomes nearly impossible. The victim of secrecy may start to feel unimportant or unworthy, believing that they are not trusted enough to be told the truth. Over time, this leads to a breakdown in trust, making it harder to rebuild the emotional foundation necessary for a healthy, open relationship. Secrecy undermines connection, leaving a trail of doubt and emotional disconnect that becomes increasingly difficult to overcome. Disregarding feelings. Disregarding feelings is a toxic red flag that chips away at emotional trust and connection in any relationship. At its core, this behavior is the consistent dismissal or invalidation of another person's emotions, whether through neglect, indifference, or direct minimization. When someone disregards your feelings, they treat your emotional experiences as unimportant or even annoying, leaving you to feel unseen, unheard, and unworthy of empathy. Instead of offering comfort or support during difficult moments, they may respond with indifference, belittling remarks, or outright rejection of your emotional state. The emotional toll of disregarding feelings is immense. Over time, you start to feel like your emotions don't matter, and that no matter how much you try to express yourself, the response you receive will be one of dismissal or neglect. This can lead to feelings of isolation as you begin to internalize the belief that your needs are not worth addressing. Every time your feelings are disregarded, it's like a small cut to your emotional well-being until you feel emotionally exhausted and disconnected from the person who should be your greatest source of support. Living with someone who disregards your feelings can leave you questioning your own worth and judgment. You begin to second-guess yourself, wondering if you're being overly sensitive or if your emotions are truly justified. The emotional gaslighting that comes with this behavior creates a toxic cycle where the victim feels increasingly alone as their emotional landscape is constantly invalidated. Ultimately, disregarding feelings destroys the trust, intimacy, and mutual respect that any healthy relationship is built on, leaving behind a trail of emotional neglect. Exploitation. Exploitation is one of the most insidious red flags in human behavior, where one person takes advantage of another for personal gain without regard for their feelings, well-being, or needs. At its core, exploitation involves manipulation or use of another individual for selfish purposes, whether it's emotional, financial, or psychological, without offering anything in return. The exploiter is skilled at identifying vulnerabilities and exploiting them, often under the guise of friendship, love, or kindness. This behavior preys on trust, turning a once genuine relationship into a one-sided transaction. In relationships, exploitation can manifest in countless ways. The exploiter might demand favors, resources, or emotional labor without ever reciprocating. They might manipulate their partner into giving more than they are comfortable with, whether it's time, money, or energy, all while offering little to no support in return. Over time, the victim feels drained, taken for granted, and emotionally used. They may begin to question their own worth, feeling as though they exist solely to serve the exploiter's needs without any consideration for their own. The emotional toll of exploitation is immense. The victim starts to feel invisible as their feelings and needs are constantly overlooked in favor of the exploiter's demands. The constant imbalance in the relationship breeds resentment, guilt, and confusion. Over time, the victim may feel as though they're stuck in a cycle of giving with no end in sight, losing their sense of self-worth and autonomy. Exploitation erodes trust, and once the victim realizes the manipulation, they're left with the painful realization that they've been taken advantage of, often without even recognizing it until the damage has been done. Avoiding accountability. Avoiding accountability is a red flag that undermines trust, fosters resentment, and creates an atmosphere where growth and resolution are impossible. At its core, avoiding accountability is the refusal to take responsibility for one's actions, mistakes, or shortcomings. Instead of owning up to errors or missteps, the person who avoids accountability shifts the blame onto others, makes excuses, or pretends the issue never existed. This behavior creates a toxic environment where honesty and transparency are replaced by defensiveness and denial. In relationships, avoiding accountability is especially damaging. When problems arise, the person who refuses to take responsibility will do anything to avoid facing the consequences of their actions. They might deflect, deny, or even manipulate the situation, making it seem like they're the victim or like you're overreacting. This leaves the other person feeling unheard, invalidated, and constantly questioning their own perception of reality. Without accountability, there is no opportunity for growth or understanding, as issues are never addressed in a meaningful way. The emotional toll of avoiding accountability is significant. It breeds frustration, confusion, and deep mistrust as you begin to feel like your concerns and emotions are being disregarded. Over time, this behavior erodes the foundation of the relationship, leaving you feeling isolated and unsupported. When someone refuses to take responsibility for their actions, it creates an imbalance where the burden of maintaining the relationship, solving problems, and making things right falls entirely on you. The inability to face mistakes makes progress impossible, leaving the relationship stuck in a cycle of unresolved tension and emotional exhaustion. Pressure. Pressure is a powerful red flag that can slowly suffocate a relationship, creating an atmosphere where emotional boundaries are disregarded and individual needs are overshadowed by external demands. At its core, pressure is the act of pushing someone to act, decide, or feel a certain way, often before they are ready or without considering their comfort level. It can come in many forms: emotional manipulation, ultimatums, or a constant sense of urgency that forces the other person into making choices under duress rather than allowing them space to think, reflect, or choose freely. In relationships, pressure often manifests when one person demands immediate answers, rushes decisions, or forces the other to meet expectations they aren't ready for. It might be subtle at first, a hint, a suggestion, or a gentle nudge, but soon it builds into something overwhelming. The person applying pressure might use guilt, fear, or love as tools, making the other person feel as though failure to comply will lead to disappointment, rejection, or the collapse of the relationship itself. The emotional toll of pressure is heavy. The person on the receiving end may begin to feel trapped, as if their own desires, boundaries, and needs are irrelevant. They may act out of fear, stress, or guilt, rather than genuine desire or comfort, leading to resentment, confusion, and emotional exhaustion. Over time, the relationship becomes more about fulfilling the needs of the person applying the pressure than about mutual respect and understanding. Pressure strips away the space needed for healthy communication and decision-making, leaving both people feeling alienated, anxious, and disconnected. Conflict avoidance. Conflict avoidance is a red flag that can slowly suffocate a relationship as it creates a false sense of peace while allowing unresolved issues to fester beneath the surface. At its core, conflict avoidance involves evading confrontation or difficult conversations, often out of fear of upsetting the other person or causing tension. While it may seem like a way to keep the peace, in reality, it prevents important issues from being addressed, allowing resentment and frustration to build up over time. The person who avoids conflict might stay silent during disagreements, shut down emotionally, or deflect difficult conversations altogether, leaving problems unresolved and relationships stagnant. The emotional toll of conflict avoidance is significant. It creates an underlying sense of dissatisfaction and emotional distance, as one person is left carrying the burden of unresolved issues. Without the opportunity to discuss concerns, both partners are left feeling unheard and misunderstood. The emotional strain grows as resentment builds, often resulting in passive-aggressive behavior, withdrawal, or emotional disconnect. Instead of dealing with problems head-on, the conflict avoider hopes the issue will disappear on its own, but in doing so, they unknowingly cause even greater harm in the relationship. In relationships, This avoidance creates a false sense of calm, but deep down, the tension remains. The person on the receiving end feels increasingly frustrated, wondering why the issues are never addressed. Over time, the failure to confront problems weakens the relationship, making it hard to rebuild trust or communication. Conflict avoidance may temporarily protect from discomfort, but it ultimately causes emotional harm, leaving both parties stuck in a cycle of unspoken frustrations, unable to move forward in a healthy way. Blame shifting. Blame shifting is one of the most destructive red flags in human behavior, as it manipulates responsibility and creates an emotionally exhausting environment. At its core, blame shifting is the act of deflecting responsibility for one's own mistakes, shortcomings, or actions, and placing the fault squarely on someone else. Instead of owning up to their errors or taking accountability, the person who engages in blame shifting turns every conflict or mistake into an opportunity to make someone else the scapegoat. This creates an endless cycle of guilt, confusion, and frustration for the victim, who is left to wonder why they are always the one held responsible, even when they've done nothing wrong. The emotional toll of blame shifting is profound. When you are constantly blamed for things that aren't your fault, it begins to erode your sense of self-worth and confidence. You start questioning your own actions even when you know you did nothing wrong, because the other person's manipulation forces you to doubt your judgment. This leaves you in a constant state of emotional uncertainty, where you feel powerless to assert your own truth or confront the issues at hand. Over time, blame shifting creates a toxic power imbalance, where the person who refuses to take responsibility gains control, while the person being blamed is left feeling emotionally drained and overwhelmed. Living with blame shifting means never getting the closure or resolution you need. Instead of addressing problems directly, the blame shifter avoids accountability, making it impossible to have an honest, productive conversation. The relationship becomes one of constant conflict, where the focus is not on solving issues, but on avoiding responsibility. This behavior undermines trust, damages self-esteem, and keeps the victim stuck in a cycle of emotional manipulation that can be difficult to break. Suppressing expression. Suppressing expression is a red flag that stifles communication, breeds emotional suppression, and ultimately destroys the foundation of genuine connection in relationships. At its core, suppressing expression is the act of holding back one's thoughts, feelings, and needs, often out of fear, insecurity, or the desire to avoid conflict. The person who suppresses expression may hide their true emotions, refuse to voice their concerns, or bottle up their frustrations until they reach a breaking point. This behavior creates an environment where open and honest communication becomes impossible, and the person feels emotionally stifled and unheard. In relationships, suppressing expression can lead to feelings of isolation, frustration, and resentment. When someone continuously holds back their thoughts and feelings, they become distant, unable to share their true selves with the person they care about. This emotional withholding prevents real intimacy, as both individuals are left to guess each other's emotions or needs. The longer this behavior goes unchecked, the more it creates a sense of disconnection, as one partner feels as though they are walking on eggshells, unsure of what's really going on beneath the surface. The emotional cost of suppressing expression is immense. Over time, the person who holds everything inside begins to feel invisible, as though their voice and perspective don't matter. They might internalize their feelings, leading to stress, anxiety, or even depression. The longer this pattern persists, the more damaging it becomes, creating a toxic cycle of emotional distance and unresolved issues. Suppressing expression creates a barrier that prevents understanding, leaving the relationship devoid of the trust and emotional connection needed to thrive. Lack of compassion. A lack of compassion is one of the most emotionally devastating red flags. signaling a profound disconnect in the relationship. At its core, compassion is the ability to understand, empathize with, and care for another's feelings and struggles. When someone lacks compassion, they fail to acknowledge or respond to the emotional needs of those around them, leaving others to navigate pain, sorrow, or stress without the support or empathy they desperately need. Instead of offering comfort or understanding, the person may be indifferent, dismissive, or even callous toward the suffering of others. In relationships, a lack of compassion can manifest in numerous ways. It might be through neglecting to offer emotional support during tough times, belittling the feelings of a partner, or simply failing to show concern when someone is hurting. This behavior creates an environment where one person feels invisible, as though their pain is trivial or unworthy of attention. Rather than feeling heard or understood, they are left to suffer in silence, with no comfort or validation from the person they need it most. The emotional toll of a lack of compassion is profound. Over time, the person on the receiving end may begin to feel isolated and unimportant, as though their emotional experiences don't matter. They may start questioning their own worth, wondering why they are not deserving of care or empathy. The absence of compassion creates a cold, emotionally barren atmosphere in the relationship, leaving one person feeling unsupported and unloved. Compassion is the glue that holds relationships together, and without it, trust erodes, connection fades, and emotional distance grows until it feels insurmountable. Sarcasm. Sarcasm is a red flag that can subtly erode trust and emotional safety in any relationship. At its core, sarcasm is a form of communication that uses sharp, cutting remarks or irony to convey the opposite of what is actually meant. While it can be used humorously in some situations, when sarcasm is frequently used in a relationship, it becomes a weapon that undermines genuine communication, leaving the recipient feeling belittled, confused, or unimportant. The person who frequently resorts to sarcasm may use it to deflect difficult emotions, mask insecurities, or simply avoid addressing the truth in a direct, vulnerable way. The emotional toll of sarcasm is deep. Over time, the recipient starts to question the true intentions behind every word. What was meant as a joke becomes a constant source of tension, as sarcasm often feels like an attack disguised as humor. The cutting nature of sarcastic remarks chips away at self-esteem, making the person feel ridiculed or disrespected. Even though sarcasm may be cloaked in humor, it creates an emotional distance, as it's hard to feel truly seen or valued when everything is wrapped in irony or mockery. In relationships, sarcasm fosters confusion and hurt. The recipient is left second-guessing whether the words spoken are meant to wound or just a playful jab. This constant ambiguity erodes trust, making it difficult to know if the other person is being sincere or just hiding behind a veil of sarcasm. Over time, the emotional disconnection grows, and what could have been an honest, open relationship becomes one filled with tension, frustration, and unresolved feelings. Sarcasm undermines authenticity, leaving behind emotional scars that become harder to heal as time goes on. Anxiety-inducing. Anxiety-inducing behavior is one of the most destabilizing red flags in relationships, often leaving the victim feeling constantly on edge, uncertain, and emotionally exhausted. At its core, this behavior is rooted in actions, words, or patterns that create overwhelming stress or discomfort, leading the other person to feel anxious or unsafe in their interactions. Whether it's through unpredictable mood swings, excessive criticism, or creating an atmosphere of tension, someone with anxiety-inducing behavior disrupts the emotional peace of those around them. Their presence alone can be enough to trigger a sense of dread, uncertainty, or hypervigilance in others. The emotional toll of anxiety-inducing behavior is profound and lasting. When you're constantly exposed to this kind of instability, you begin to feel emotionally drained, as though you're walking on eggshells every time you interact with them. The person's unpredictable reactions, overly intense demands, or frequent mood changes make it impossible to relax, and you start to anticipate conflict or emotional upheaval at every turn. Instead of feeling supported or loved, you feel like you're navigating a minefield, unsure of what might set them off. Over time, this emotional turmoil chips away at your mental well-being, leaving you anxious, stressed, and unsure of how to regain control over your own peace of mind. Living with someone who induces anxiety can lead to feelings of self-doubt, insecurity, and confusion. You may start to question whether the anxiety is your fault, wondering if you're being too sensitive or if you're imagining things. But the reality is that their behavior creates a toxic environment where your emotional health is continuously compromised. Anxiety-inducing actions prevent a relationship from being a safe space, leaving you emotionally drained, isolated, and often questioning your own sense of stability. Validation seeking. Validation seeking is a red flag that creates an emotional imbalance, eroding a person's sense of self-worth and fostering dependency on external approval. At its core, validation seeking is the constant need for reassurance, praise, or recognition from others to feel worthy, valued, or good enough. The individual who seeks constant validation is often unsure of their own identity or decisions, relying on others to affirm their choices and emotional state. This behavior can manifest in many forms, from fishing for compliments to excessively seeking feedback on every action or decision. In relationships, validation seeking can be exhausting and draining for both parties. The person who is constantly seeking validation may demand constant attention, approval, and affirmation, leaving little space for healthy, reciprocal interactions. Instead of relying on their own inner strength or self-esteem, they place their worth in the hands of others, and any lack of acknowledgement or praise can lead to insecurity, frustration, or emotional outbursts. This creates a cycle where the relationship becomes more about fulfilling the person's need for validation than about building mutual support and understanding. The emotional toll of validation seeking is significant. It undermines personal growth and self-reliance as the individual becomes emotionally dependent on the opinions and reactions of others. Over time, this behavior can leave the person feeling empty and unfulfilled, as external validation is never enough to fill the internal void. The relationship becomes a constant quest for approval, leading to feelings of anxiety, self-doubt, and emotional exhaustion for both individuals. Without the ability to validate themselves, they remain locked in a cycle of insecurity, making it difficult to foster genuine connection and trust. Anger. Anger is a red flag that can destroy relationships, leaving a trail of hurt, confusion, and fear in its wake. At its core, anger is a powerful emotion that, when unchecked, turns destructive. It's often not the anger itself that's the problem, but how it's expressed or handled. Someone who is consistently angry, especially without clear or justifiable reason, creates an environment of constant tension and emotional instability. Rather than communicating openly or addressing issues calmly, they react impulsively, often through yelling, harsh words, or even physical outbursts, leaving others to navigate the fallout of their emotional volatility. In relationships, anger can quickly turn toxic. The person might erupt over minor issues, making mountains out of molehills, or their anger may be used as a form of control, where they manipulate situations to assert dominance or punish others. This creates an atmosphere of fear, where the other person never knows when the next outburst will come. Over time, it becomes emotionally exhausting to be around someone whose anger is unpredictable and overwhelming. The emotional toll is immense, constant anxiety, walking on eggshells, and feeling trapped in a relationship where peace is a distant memory. The deeper impact of anger in relationships is profound. Those on the receiving end often feel belittled, devalued, and unsafe. Their emotional well-being becomes tied to the moods of the angry individual, never knowing whether they'll be met with love or fury. Trust erodes, and intimacy dies when anger is the primary way of interacting. Over time, the anger becomes a shield, preventing real communication, healing, and connection from ever taking place. Without understanding and self-control, anger isn't just an emotion. It's a weapon that can dismantle relationships and leave deep emotional scars. Conversation manipulation. Conversation manipulation is a subtle yet incredibly damaging red flag that distorts communication and undermines honest interactions. At its core, conversation manipulation involves